She shouldn't have answered that phone. The words cut through the marble lobby like a knife through silk, spoken by a man whose monthly salary could feed a village. But Naomi Carter had answered, in flawless Dutch, with the precision of a diplomat and the composure of someone who'd navigated far more treacherous waters than a luxury hotel's front desk. The billionaire owner stood frozen, his champagne glass suspended midair, watching a woman in a faded housekeeping uniform conduct international business with an elegance his own staff couldn't match. 6 years. 6 years she'd pushed that cart, scrubbed those toilets, and no one had asked why her eyes held languages they'd never heard her speak. Now the question wasn't whether she belonged in that uniform, it was whether the hotel deserved to keep her. I invite you to follow my story to the very end, and please like and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The morning started the way 6 years of mornings had started for Naomi Carter, with her alarm clock screaming at 4:47 a.m. in a studio apartment that smelled perpetually of bleach and regret. She didn't hit snooze. She never hit snooze. People who hit snooze had the luxury of choice, and choice was a currency Naomi had spent long ago. She dressed in the dark, pulling on the polyester uniform that had become a second skin. Navy blue with white piping, the kind designed to make a person blend into wallpaper. The name tag read Naomi C. Not because the hotel cared about her last name, but because the plastic letters couldn't fit more than 8 characters. Carter had been reduced to a consonant. The bus ride took 43 minutes through a city that was just beginning to wake. Philadelphia looked different at 5:30 a.m., softer somehow, like it was still deciding what kind of day it wanted to be. Naomi watched the streets scroll past her window, listened to the hiss of the doors, and let her mind wander through conjugations in Mandarin, verb tenses in Portuguese, the rolling R's of Russian that had taken her 3 months to perfect. She was fluent in 11 languages. The hotel knew about Spanish. They'd marked it on her application 6 years ago when she was desperate enough to take anything. When the PhD program had fallen through and the student loans had started their relentless countdown. Spanish was useful for the Latin American guests, for the occasional request that needed translating. They paid her an extra 75 cents per hour for it. They didn't know about the other 10. The Regency Grandeur Hotel rose 37 stories into the Philadelphia skyline, all glass and steel and the kind of quiet wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Naomi entered through the service entrance, swiped her badge, and descended into the basement where the real work happened, where uniforms were checked, time cards were punched, and the invisible machinery of luxury hummed its constant song. "Morning, Naomi." Rita from laundry waved without looking up from her coffee. She'd been there 18 years, had 3 grandchildren, and knew every stain the human body could produce. "Morning, Rita." Naomi grabbed her cart, checked the supply inventory with practiced efficiency. Rubber gloves, disinfectant, glass cleaner, toilet brush, vacuum, fresh linens. Everything in its place because chaos in the supply closet meant chaos in the rooms, and chaos meant complaints, and complaints meant write-ups. "You got the executive floor again today?" Rita said, finally looking up. There was something in her eyes, sympathy maybe, or warning. "Gonzalez requested you specifically." Naomi's hand stilled on the cart handle. Sophia Gonzalez, head of housekeeping. The woman who smiled with her mouth and stabbed with her eyes, who'd spent 6 years making sure Naomi Carter stayed exactly where she was. "Did she say why?" Rita shrugged, but her silence said everything. In 6 years, Naomi had learned to read the spaces between words, the things people didn't say. The executive floor was both privilege and punishment, cleaner rooms, better tips, but also higher scrutiny, impossible standards, and guests who treated you like furniture that occasionally needed to be moved. The elevator to the 32nd floor took 48 seconds. Naomi counted. She always counted. It was a habit from her academic life, when she'd timed herself on translation exercises, racing against native speakers to prove she belonged in rooms that questioned her presence. The hallway stretched before her like a hotel corridor in a dream. Plush carpet, recessed lighting, abstract art that probably cost more than her annual salary. She'd cleaned these halls so many times she knew every painting, every scuff mark management wouldn't pay to fix, every corner where the vacuum caught on the baseboards. Room 3204 first. Checkout scheduled for noon, Guest departed early. She knocked twice, standard protocol, then swiped her master key and pushed her card inside. The room looked like a small hurricane had passed through. Clothes scattered across furniture, towels wadded on the bathroom floor, room service trays stacked on the desk with congealed remnants of last night's steak dinner. Naomi had seen worse. Much worse. She worked methodically, the way she always did. Strip the bed, bag the linens, spray down surfaces, scrub the bathroom until it sparkled, vacuum in overlapping lines so management couldn't find a single strand of carpet misaligned. The work was meditative in its repetition, allowed her mind to drift to other places, other languages, other versions of herself. In Mandarin, she mentally conjugated the verb to dream. In Arabic, she recited poetry she'd memorized in graduate school. In French, she composed letters she'd never sent to professors who'd stopped returning her emails when the funding dried up. The phone rang. Naomi froze, spray bottle suspended midair. Guests weren't supposed to be in the rooms during cleaning. Checkout was confirmed. The room should have been empty. The phone rang again, insistent. She should ignore it. Protocol was clear. Housekeeping doesn't answer guest phones. But something made her move toward the nightstand, made her reach for the receiver, made her break a rule she'd followed for 6 years. Hello? Her voice was uncertain, caught between languages. The response came in rapid-fire Dutch, the words tumbling over each other with the kind of urgency that transcended translation. A woman's voice, panicked, explaining something about a canceled flight and a critical meeting and documents that needed to be at the Belgian consulate within 2 hours. Naomi's brain shifted gears without conscious thought, the way it always did when confronted with linguistic puzzles. She responded in Dutch, native level, accent perfect, the kind of fluency that came from 2 years living in Amsterdam during her graduate work. Slow down, please. I can help you. Tell me exactly what you need. The conversation lasted 7 minutes. Naomi took notes on hotel stationery, asked clarifying questions, confirmed details in 3 languages as the caller switched between Dutch, French, and English. The woman was a textile exporter, had been staying in room 3206, had left her portfolio in the hotel safe and needed it couriered immediately. I'll contact the front desk and ensure your documents reach the consulate within 90 minutes, Naomi said, her Dutch crisp and professional. May I have your reference number for the safe deposit? She wrote down the information, confirmed the consulate address, and was in the middle of explaining the hotel's courier service when she realized the door behind her had opened. Sofia Gonzalez stood in the doorway, like judgment personified. Behind her, 3 other members of the housekeeping staff clustered, eyes wide. And behind them, half hidden by the doorframe, was someone Naomi didn't immediately recognize. A man in a suit so expensive it probably came with its own insurance policy. Naomi finished the call, set down the phone, straightened her shoulders. Ms. Gonzalez. Her voice was steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Who gave you permission to answer that phone? Sofia's English carried the musical accent of her native El Salvador, but there was nothing musical in her tone. The guest was in distress. You are housekeeping. You clean rooms. You do not conduct business on guest phones. You do not speak to clients. You certainly do not. She paused, eyes narrowing. What language was that? Dutch. The word landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading outward. The other housekeeping staff exchanged glances. The man in the expensive suit stepped forward, and Naomi finally recognized him. Marcus Winters, the hotel's owner. She'd seen him exactly 3 times in 6 years, always from a distance, always surrounded by an entourage that cleared hallways before he walked through them. You speak Dutch? His voice was measured, curious in a way that felt dangerous. Yes, sir. Among other... Did I ask you about other languages? Sophia cut in, stepping between Naomi and Winters like a barrier. Did I ask you to showcase your talents? You were hired to clean rooms. That is your job. That is your only job. The guest's needs are handled by qualified staff at the front desk, not by housekeeping, not by you. Sophia's hand shot out, finger pointed at the door. Give me your master key. You're suspended pending review. The words hit like physical blows. Suspended. 6 years of perfect attendance, 0 complaints, employee of the month plaques gathering dust in her apartment. suspended for helping a guest. Ms. Gonzalez, if I could explain, key, now. Naomi unclipped the key card from her belt, held it out. Her hand didn't shake. She'd learned long ago not to let them see her shake. Sophia snatched the key, turned to the other staff members. Rosa, finish this floor. Maria, take 3206 and process whatever situation this is through proper channels. Everyone else, back to work. This incident will be addressed in tomorrow's staff meeting as an example of what not to do. The women scattered like birds. Only Marcus Winters remained, studying Naomi with an expression she couldn't read. What other languages? He asked quietly. Sophia's head snapped around. Mr. Winters, I assure you this is a housekeeping matter that doesn't require— What other languages? He repeated, louder now, eyes never leaving Naomi's face. She could lie, could minimize, could protect herself the way she'd been protecting herself for 6 years, but something in his gaze suggested he already knew the answer, was testing whether she'd tell the truth. Mandarin, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Arabic, Russian, Italian, German, Japanese, she paused. Dutch, as you heard. I have reading proficiency in Latin and ancient Greek, conversational ability in Korean, and I'm currently working on Polish. The silence that followed was absolute. Sophia's face had gone pale, then red, cycling through shades of fury. You listed Spanish on your application. Spanish, that's it. That's what the form asked for. Languages relevant to the position. Spanish is our primary, secondary language for guest services. And you didn't think, Sophia's voice was climbing, that perhaps fluency in 13 languages might be relevant? That maybe, possibly, we could have used someone with your alleged skills in a capacity beyond scrubbing toilets. I applied for transfers. Repeatedly. I have no record of— I submitted 17 formal transfer requests in 6 years. Naomi's voice remained steady, but something was breaking loose inside her. 6 years of silence fracturing. To guest services, to the concierge desk, to the business center. I included my credentials with each application, my master's degree in linguistics, my work experience abroad, my certifications. Every request was denied without interview. That's impossible, Sophia said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Is it? Naomi turned to Marcus Winters. I have copies of every submission, dated, documented, submitted through proper HR channels. Would you like to see them? Winters' expression had shifted into something colder, more calculating. Ms. Gonzalez, I'd like to see Ms. Carter's personnel file. Immediately. Sir, with respect, this is a departmental matter. I'd like to see it immediately. His tone left no room for negotiation. He pulled out his phone, typed something rapidly. My assistant will meet us in HR in 10 minutes. Ms. Carter, you'll accompany us. Mr. Winters, she's suspended. She's reinstated, effective immediately. And Sophia? He turned, pinned the housekeeping manager with a look that could freeze steel. If I find those transfer requests in her file and no record of them being properly reviewed, we're going to have a very different conversation. They left Naomi standing in room 3204, alone with her cart and her racing heart, and the phone that had just changed everything. She didn't move for a full minute. Then, slowly, methodically, she finished cleaning the room. Because that's what you did when your world was falling apart. You completed the task in front of you. You made the bed with hospital corners. You aligned the towels. You erased every trace of the previous occupant. You became invisible again, even when someone had finally seen you. The HR office was located on the 5th floor in a windowless suite that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Naomi had been there exactly once before, during her initial onboarding 6 years ago. The same artificial plants still gathered dust in the corners. The same motivational posters about teamwork still papered the walls. Marcus Winters sat behind the HR director's desk like he owned it, which, technically, he did. His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, who Naomi recognized from elevator rides, had materialized with a laptop and was typing furiously. Sophia Gonzalez sat in the corner, arms crossed, radiating fury. The HR director, a nervous man named Mitchell Crane, who looked perpetually on the verge of a stress-induced heart attack, pulled up Naomi's file on his computer with trembling fingers. 6 years and 4 months, Mitchell read from the screen. Hired as housekeeping staff, level 2, Promoted to level 3 after 2 years. Current salary. He paused, shot an uncomfortable glance at Winters. Current salary is $16.75 per hour plus Spanish language differential. What's the differential? Winters asked. 75 cents per hour. Naomi watched Winters' jaw tighten. $17.50 per hour for a woman with a master's degree and fluency in 13 languages. We pay market rate for housekeeping, Mitchell started. Show me the transfer request. Mitchell scrolled, clicked, scrolled some more. His face went gray. There are quite a few here. How many? 17. All marked as reviewed and denied. On what grounds? Mitchell clicked through files, his hands now visibly shaking. It says insufficient qualifications for requested positions. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Winters turned to Sophia. You reviewed these? Yes, but a woman with a master's degree in linguistics, fluency in 13 languages, and 6 years of perfect performance reviews was deemed insufficiently qualified for guest services? His voice was soft now, which somehow made it worse. Walk me through that logic. Sophia's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The guest services positions require specific training, which we provide, to high school graduates with no language skills. Winters leaned forward. Try again. She didn't interview well. She was never given an interview. Mitchell's voice was barely a whisper. There's no record of any interview being scheduled. The room felt like it was shrinking. Naomi watched Sophia's face cycle through expressions: defiance, panic, calculation. She'd seen that progression before in professors who'd been caught plagiarizing, in administrators who'd been exposed for bias. It was the look of someone watching their excuses evaporate in real time. I want the truth, Winters said. Now. Sophia's shoulders sagged. When she spoke, her voice had lost its sharp edges, replaced by something tired and bitter. She was overqualified. Is that what you want to hear? We get people like her sometimes. Too educated, too skilled. They take entry-level positions because they need the money, and then they leave the second something better comes along. I've lost too many good workers that way. So yes, I denied her transfers. I kept her in housekeeping because she was reliable, because she showed up, because she did the work without complaint. You kept her in housekeeping, Winter said slowly, because she was too good to promote. I kept her in housekeeping because that's where we needed her. You kept her in housekeeping because you could. Winter stood, buttoned his suit jacket. Mitchell, I want a full audit of every transfer request denied in the past 10 years, every single one. Cross-reference them with employee credentials. If we have other people like Ms. Carter buried in positions below their qualifications, I want to know about it. Yes, sir. Patricia, draft a termination letter for Ms. Gonzalez, effective immediately. Sophia shot to her feet. You can't. I've been here 12 years. You've been here 12 years committing systematic discrimination. You didn't just deny Ms. Carter opportunities, you lied about it. You falsified reviews, you violated our own HR policies. So, yes, Sophia, I absolutely can. Security will escort you out within the hour. Sophia's face crumpled, but Winters had already turned away from her, attention fixed on Naomi. Ms. Carter, I apologize. On behalf of this hotel, this company, and every person who should have caught this and didn't, I apologize. No one should have to fight this hard to be seen. Naomi didn't trust herself to speak. 6 years of rage and grief and swallowed pride were rising in her throat like a tide. I'd like to offer you a position in our International Guest Services Division, Winters continued. Senior liaison role, direct reports to our Global Hospitality Director. Your language skills would be invaluable for our overseas clients and diplomatic guests. The salary is $78,000 annually, plus benefits, with performance bonuses quarterly. The numbers didn't compute. Naomi's brain, trained to translate between languages, suddenly couldn't translate between realities. $78,000. She made $34,000 now, before taxes. Her voice cracked. I don't understand. What don't you understand? Why now? Why not 6 years ago? Why not after my first transfer request, or my 5th, or my 10th? The words were pouring out now, unstoppable. I did everything right. I followed every protocol. I dressed appropriately and spoke appropriately and smiled appropriately, and I was invisible for 6 years because that's what people like me have to be. And now, because a phone rang at the right moment, because you happened to be walking past that room, suddenly I'm valuable? Winters was quiet for a long moment. You're right. It shouldn't have taken a lucky accident. It shouldn't have taken me personally witnessing your skills. The systems we built to prevent discrimination failed you, and I failed you. That's not an excuse, it's an explanation. But here's what I can control. What happens next? He gestured to Patricia, who pulled up something on her laptop and turned it to face Naomi. This is our current guest roster. We have 17 international delegations staying here this month. Trade representatives from China, diplomats from Belgium, a tech consortium from South Korea. Every single one of them has requested translation services. We've been outsourcing to contractors at $300 per hour. Naomi looked at the list, at the languages she spoke arranged like a checklist of her own unrealized potential. You're not just qualified for the liaison position, Winters said. You're uniquely qualified, and I'm not offering you this job as charity or apology. I'm offering it because this hotel needs you. We've needed you for 6 years. We were just too stupid to realize it. I need time to think. Of course. Take the rest of the week. Paid. He pulled out a business card, wrote something on the back. My personal cell number. Call me when you're ready. Or if you decide this hotel doesn't deserve a second chance. I'll understand that too. I'll also provide references and compensate you for the opportunities we cost you. Naomi took the card. Her hands were steady now, muscle memory from years of holding herself together. What about Sophia, she asked. She has a family, kids in college. Winter's expression softened slightly. That's generous of you to consider, but Sophia made choices that harmed you and, based on what we're likely to find in the audit, harmed others. Kindness to one person can't come at the cost of justice for many. She'll receive severance and references that reflect her administrative skills. But she won't work in hospitality management again, not with my company. Naomi nodded slowly. It wasn't satisfaction she felt. It was something more complex, more bittersweet. Sophia had kept her down, but Sophia was also a woman navigating her own survival in systems that chewed up people like them. I need to finish my shift, Naomi heard herself say. You're suspended, remember? Paid leave. Then I need to go home. She stood, moved toward the door. Her legs felt strange, like she was learning to walk again after years of crawling. Miss Carter? Winters' voice stopped her at the threshold. That woman on the phone, the Dutch textile exporter. She's coming to the hotel tomorrow to personally thank whoever helped her. She said you saved a $3 million contract. I'd like you here when she arrives. Naomi didn't turn around. I'll think about it. She walked out of HR, down the hallway, into the elevator. Hit the button for the basement. Rode down in silence. Her cart was still where she'd left it, supplies aligned with military precision. Someone had finished her rooms, probably Rosa, who had 3 kids and a husband on disability and couldn't afford to make waves. Naomi changed out of her uniform slowly, folded it with the same care she'd folded 6 years of hope and humiliation into something small enough to carry. She put on her street clothes, jeans and a sweater that had seen better years, and walked out through the service entrance. The city looked different in afternoon light, sharper somehow, more defined. Or maybe she was just seeing it with new eyes, eyes that hadn't been trained to look down. Her phone buzzed, a text from Rita. Girl, everyone's talking. You okay? She typed back, I don't know yet. Another text, this one from a number she didn't recognize. This is Patricia from Mr. Winters' office. He wanted me to share that the Belgian consulate received the documents with 20 minutes to spare. The textile exporter sent flowers to the hotel with a note saying you were magnificently professional. I thought you should know. Naomi stood on the sidewalk, phone in hand, flowers being sent in her name to a building where she'd been invisible for 6 years. She started laughing. Not the polite laugh she'd perfected for guests, but something real and raw and slightly unhinged. A woman passing by gave her a concerned look. Naomi waved her off, kept laughing until tears ran down her face, and she couldn't tell if they were from humor or heartbreak or 6 years of holding her breath underwater. When she finally stopped, she felt empty and full at the same time. Hollowed out and expanded, like she'd been living in a room too small for her soul and someone had finally torn down the walls. She walked to the bus stop, waited for the 47 that would take her home. While she waited, she pulled out her phone and opened her voice notes app. She did this sometimes when the thoughts were too big to keep inside, recorded them in different languages, let the words find their own shape. In Dutch, she said quietly, there's a word, thuiskomen. It means coming home, but it also means arriving at a place where you belong. I've been searching for thuiskomen for 6 years in a building full of rooms that weren't mine. She switched to Mandarin. There's a phrase, shou de yun kai jian yue ming. Keep your faith and the clouds will part to reveal the moon. But what they don't tell you is how heavy your arms get from holding up faith when no one else believes in the moon. Then Arabic. Kad yakuna sabra murran, lakin thamaratahu hulwa. Patience may be bitter, but its fruit is sweet, though sometimes the fruit takes so long to grow that you forget what sweetness tastes like. The bus arrived. Naomi climbed on, took a seat in the back, pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Tomorrow she would have to decide. Tomorrow she would have to choose between a justice that came 6 years too late and the satisfaction of walking away from a system that had failed her. Tomorrow she would have to figure out if she could work for people who'd only seen her worth when it was convenient for them. But today, right now, she was just Naomi Carter, riding a bus through a city that hadn't changed, except for the woman looking out its windows. And that woman? She was finally, after 6 years, beginning to remember who she'd been before she learned to disappear. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Small, tidy, lined with books in languages most of her neighbors couldn't read. Naomi dropped her bag by the door, kicked off her shoes, and stood in the center of the room feeling simultaneously exhausted and electrified. Her laptop sat on the small kitchen table, surrounded by language textbooks and flashcards for Polish. She'd been teaching herself the way she always did, because the learning itself had become a form of resistance. They could keep her in a uniform, could deny her transfers, could pretend she was just another body pushing a cart, but they couldn't stop her from growing. She opened the laptop, navigated to a folder she'd created 6 years ago. Inside were all 17 transfer requests, each one meticulously documented. Cover letters in English, resumes highlighting her credentials, copies of her master's thesis on linguistic preservation in immigrant communities, letters of recommendation from professors who'd once believed in her. She'd kept them all. Not because she thought she'd need proof, though apparently she had, but because she needed to remember that she'd tried, that she hadn't just accepted her circumstances, that she'd fought, even when the fighting felt futile. There was something else in the folder, a document she'd started 3 years ago, during a particularly dark night, when the weight of invisibility had felt crushing. She'd titled it, The Cost of Being Unseen, and filled it with calculations. The salary differential between her housekeeping position and equivalent roles requiring her qualifications. The compound interest on student loans that might have been paid off by now. The career trajectory she'd abandoned. The opportunities missed. The total came to somewhere north of $400,000 over 6 years. $400,000 worth of seeing her as anything other than a body to clean rooms. Naomi closed the document. She'd thought seeing the numbers would make her angrier, but instead she felt strangely calm. The math was just math. The real cost wasn't calculable. It was in the daily erosion of self-worth, the constant negotiation between who she was and who she was allowed to be, the exhaustion of maintaining fluency in languages she never got to speak. Her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but some instinct made her pick up. Ms. Carter? The voice was accented, female, vaguely familiar. This is Isabelle Duchamp. We spoke this morning. Well, you spoke to me. In Dutch. Naomi sat down slowly. Ms. Duchamp, I'm glad your documents arrived safely. Thanks to you. The consulate told me a hotel housekeeper handled the entire arrangement in perfect Dutch, French, and English. They were quite impressed. A pause. I was curious, so I called the hotel to thank you personally. They transferred me to someone named Marcus Winters, who told me a very interesting story. Did he? He did. He also mentioned you're considering a position in their International Services Division. I wanted to call and tell you that if you don't take that job, you should call me. My company handles textile imports across 11 European markets. We desperately need people who understand both language and cultural nuance. The salary would start at $95,000, plus relocation assistance if you're willing to move to Brussels. Naomi's breath caught. $95,000? You saved me $3 million today. That's worth considerably more than $95,000. But I have budget constraints. Isabel laughed. I'm serious about this, Ms. Carter. Send me your CV. I'll have my HR director contact you this week. They talked for another 10 minutes. Isabel explained her company, the role, the opportunities for advancement. By the time they hung up, Naomi had an email address and a job offer that had materialized out of thin air, or rather, out of a single phone call she wasn't supposed to have answered. She sat with her laptop, staring at the blank email composition screen. 2 opportunities. 2 completely different futures. Stay at the hotel and rebuild the system that had failed her, or leave and build something entirely new. Neither option erased the 6 years. Neither option gave her back the time she'd lost. But both options proved something Sofia Gonzalez had tried to bury. Naomi Carter was exactly as valuable as she'd always known she was. She started typing. Not an email to Isabel, not yet. Instead, she opened a new document and began writing everything that had happened, from the phone call to the confrontation to this moment. She wrote in English first, then translated it into Dutch, then Mandarin, then Arabic. She wrote it in every language she spoke, as if the story needed to exist in all of them to be true. By the time she finished, it was dark outside. Her stomach was growling. She'd forgotten to eat lunch, too much adrenaline to think about food. She made simple rice and vegetables, ate standing at the counter, mind still processing the day's revelations. Her phone buzzed again. Rita. Meeting tomorrow. Management's freaking out. Sophia's gone. Half the staff is scared they're next. Naomi typed back, why would they be scared? Because if they're auditing transfers, they're going to find other stuff. Wage theft, schedule manipulation, all the little ways they've been screwing us. The response made Naomi pause. She'd been so focused on her own situation that she hadn't considered the larger implications. How many other people had been denied opportunities? How many other voices had been silenced? She thought about Rosa, finishing her rooms today. About Rita, with her 18 years of institutional knowledge and 3 grandchildren. About Maria, who spoke perfect Portuguese and had never been asked if she wanted more than housekeeping. The system hadn't just failed Naomi. It had failed all of them. She picked up Marcus Winter's business card, ran her thumb over the embossed lettering. His personal cell number was written on the back in neat, precise handwriting. She didn't call, not yet. But she didn't throw the card away either. Instead, she went back to her laptop and pulled up her resume. Updated it. Added the day's events under additional experience. Provided emergency diplomatic translation services resulting in preservation of 3 abolished international contract. Identified systematic discrimination in HR practices leading to organizational reform. It looked good on paper. Better than 6 years of maintained cleanliness standards in luxury hospitality environment. She saved the document. Sent 1 copy to Isabelle Duchamp. Saved another for Marcus Winters, though she hadn't decided yet if she'd use it. Then she did something she hadn't done in 6 years. She opened her email, found the folder of messages from her graduate school professors, and started writing responses. Not asking for help this time, not explaining her circumstances, just reconnecting. Telling them she was still here, still learning, still using everything they'd taught her. Most of the emails would probably bounce. People moved on, changed institutions, forgot graduate students they'd mentored years ago. But a few might get through. A few might remember her. And that felt important somehow, reminding the world she existed beyond the 4 walls of a hotel room she was meant to clean and forget. The night stretched out ahead of her, full of possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. Naomi sat in her small apartment surrounded by languages that proved she was more than her uniform suggested. And for the first time in 6 years, she let herself imagine a future that wasn't just survival. She imagined thriving. She imagined being seen. She imagined walking into rooms where her presence was expected, even welcomed, rather than invisible, until someone needed something cleaned. She imagined Tuiskomen, coming home to herself. The phone call tomorrow would change everything. The meeting with the Dutch textile exporter, the decision about which future to choose. But tonight, Naomi Carter sat in the dark and let herself feel the full weight of 6 years of invisibility lifting, molecule by molecule, until she could finally breathe without pressing down the parts of herself that didn't fit into acceptable boxes. Tonight, she was enough. She had always been enough. Tomorrow, she would make sure the world knew it too. The morning arrived with the kind of gray Philadelphia dawn that made everything look washed out and uncertain. Naomi had barely slept, her mind cycling through scenarios and conversations and the weight of decisions that felt too large for one person to carry. She'd made coffee at 5 a.m., watched the sky lighten through her apartment window, and tried to convince herself that whatever happened today, she would handle it. By 7:30, she was dressed in clothes she hadn't worn in years. A charcoal blazer she'd bought for job interviews that never materialized, pressed slacks, a cream blouse that still fit despite living on a housekeeper's budget. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. 6 years of uniforms had made her forget she owned clothes that suggested she might be someone worth listening to. The hotel looked different when she entered through the main lobby instead of the service entrance. Guests moved through the space with the casual entitlement of people who'd never scrubbed their own toilets, never worried about whether 75 cents an hour would cover the difference between rent and electricity. The marble floors she'd mopped 1,000 times gleamed under recessed lighting, and Naomi felt a strange dissonance. She knew the chemical composition of the cleaning solution that made them shine, knew exactly how many times you had to pass the buffer over each section to achieve that mirror finish, but she'd never actually stood here as someone who belonged. "Ms. Carter." Patricia materialized beside her like she'd been waiting. "Mr. Winters asked me to bring you to the executive conference room. The delegation from Belgium arrived early. Ms. Duchamp is quite eager to meet you." They rode the elevator to the 37th floor, a level Naomi had seen only in training videos during orientation. The executive suite occupied the entire top floor, all floor-to-ceiling windows and the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted. Patricia led her down a hallway lined with black and white photographs of the hotel's history, the groundbreaking ceremony in 1982, the grand opening gala, various dignitaries and celebrities who'd stayed here over the decades. "You're not in the system anymore as housekeeping staff," Patricia said quietly as they walked. "Mr. Winters had me update your access permissions last night. You're listed as consultant pending permanent placement. Your badge will work on all floors now." Naomi touched the ID badge clipped to her blazer, the same one she'd worn yesterday, but somehow it felt different, heavier, like it meant something now beyond being a glorified tracking device. The conference room was all glass and polished wood, dominated by a table that could seat 20. Marcus Winters stood at the head, talking with a woman Naomi recognized from her voice, even though they'd never met in person. Isabelle Duchamp was younger than Naomi expected, early 40s maybe, with sharp features and the kind of elegant efficiency that suggested she didn't waste time on anything unnecessary. "Ms. Carter." Winters turned, and something in his expression made Naomi think he was seeing her differently too. Not the invisible housekeeper, but the woman in the blazer who spoke 13 languages. "Thank you for coming. I know you're still considering your options, but Ms. Duchamp insisted on meeting you personally." Isabel crossed the room with her hand extended, and when she spoke it was in Dutch, the words flowing naturally. "I wanted to see the woman who saved my contract and apparently exposed an entire system of discrimination in a single morning. You've had quite an eventful week." Naomi shook her hand, responded in the same language. "I answered a phone. The rest just happened." "You answered a phone in perfect Dutch with the composure of a trained diplomat while wearing a housekeeper's uniform. That's not just happened. That's skill meeting opportunity." Isabel switched to English, glanced at Winters. "I've already tried to steal her away from you. My offer stands at $95,000 plus relocation to Brussels. I assume you're going to try to outbid me?" Winters smiled, but there was tension beneath it. "I'm going to try to convince her that fixing broken systems is more satisfying than escaping them." "Interesting pitch," Isabel said, "though I'd argue that leaving a system that failed you for 6 years isn't escape, it's self-respect." They were talking about Naomi like she was a prized acquisition, and part of her wanted to be flattered. But another part, the part that had spent 6 years being treated like equipment, bristled at being negotiated over as if her presence were a business transaction. Could you both stop discussing me like I'm not in the room? The words came out sharper than Naomi intended, but she didn't take them back. Isabel's expression shifted to something like approval. Fair point. My apologies. Would you like to discuss the offer directly? I'd like to understand what I'm actually being offered, both of you. Naomi moved to the conference table, pulled out a chair, and sat down with deliberate casualness. Mr. Winters, you mentioned a liaison position at $78,000. What does that actually entail? Because I've learned not to trust vague promises. Winters took the seat across from her, and Patricia slid into a chair at the end of the table, laptop open and ready. The position would have you working directly with our international guest services team. You'd handle all translation needs for diplomatic guests, corporate clients, and international delegations. You'd also be consulting on our global expansion. We're opening properties in Seoul, Dubai, and Amsterdam over the next 18 months. Your role would involve cultural consultation, staff training, and quality control for our language services. So I'd be teaching your staff how to avoid treating people the way I was treated. Yes, among other things. Winters didn't flinch from the accusation. The HR audit I mentioned yesterday? We've already found 4 other employees with advanced degrees working in positions well below their qualifications. 2 in housekeeping, 1 in maintenance, 1 in the kitchen. All of them filed transfer requests that were denied. All of them minorities. All of them women. Naomi felt her chest tighten. 4 others. So far, we're still reviewing files, but it's clear this wasn't an isolated incident with Sofia Gonzalez. This was pattern and practice. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, to keep certain people in certain places. And you want me to fix that system while working within it? Naomi looked at Isabel. Your offer is to leave that system entirely, to start fresh somewhere that doesn't have 6 years of my invisible labor built into its foundation. Isabel leaned against the window, silhouetted by morning light. I won't pretend my offer is altruistic. I need someone with your skills, and I'm willing to pay for them. But I'm also not going to ask you to rebuild a house that tried to bury you in the basement. Sometimes the most radical act is walking away. And sometimes, Winters interjected, the most radical act is staying and making sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else. I'm not asking you to forgive this hotel, Ms. Carter. I'm asking you to help me dismantle the parts of it that were designed to fail people like you. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Naomi looked between them. These 2 people offering her completely different futures, and felt the weight of choice pressing down on her shoulders. I need specifics, she said finally. Not philosophy. Specifics. Mr. Winters, what happens to the other 4 people you found? Are they getting the same opportunities I'm getting, or are they just going to get apologies and gift cards? Winters glanced at Patricia, who pulled up something on her laptop and turned it to face Naomi. Maria Santos, currently housekeeping, master's degree in education, fluent in Portuguese and Spanish. We're offering her a position in our training department at $62,000 annually. Patricia scrolled to the next name. Rosa Chen, housekeeping, bachelor's in accounting, passed her CPA exam 3 years ago but couldn't afford to stop working long enough to find an accounting position. We're moving her to our finance department at $68,000. Another scroll. Jennifer Williams, maintenance. Associate's degree in hospitality management, 10 years experience in hotel operations before taking this job out of desperation during the 2015 recession. She's being offered assistant manager for our operations department at $71,000. And the 4th? Carmen Rodriguez, kitchen staff, culinary degree from a program in Mexico City, 15 years of high-end restaurant experience before immigrating. We're making her sous chef at our signature restaurant at $65,000 plus profit sharing. Naomi stared at the screen, at the names and numbers that represented lives that had been running parallel to hers, invisible in the same ways for the same reasons. Have you told them yet? We're meeting with each of them today. You're first because your situation became public. The others, we want to handle this with dignity, not as damage control, but as genuine correction. Winters closed the laptop. But I wanted you to see this, to know that what happened yesterday wasn't just about you getting justice. It was about exposing a system that was grinding up good people and throwing away their potential. That's a compelling speech, Isabel cut in, but it doesn't change the fact that Ms. Carter would still be working for people who only saw her value when it was convenient. Marcus, I respect what you're trying to do here, but let's be honest. If Ms. Carter hadn't answered that phone in front of you, she'd still be cleaning toilets. That's not a system you can fix with good intentions and salary adjustments. You're right, Winters's voice was quiet. And I'm not going to stand here and pretend otherwise. But Isabel, you're offering her escape. I'm offering her the chance to make sure no one else needs to escape. There's value in both. The question is which one Ms. Carter needs. Naomi stood, walked to the window. 37 floors below, the city moved through its morning rhythms. People going to jobs that valued them, jobs that ignored them, jobs that ground them down molecule by molecule until they forgot they'd ever been anything else. She could see the bus stop where she'd waited yesterday, could trace the route that had carried her between two versions of herself for 6 years. I have a question for both of you, she said, without turning around. What happens if I say no to both offers? What if I decide this hotel doesn't deserve my labor and your company doesn't get to benefit from someone else's discrimination? What if I just walk away entirely? The question hung in the air. Naomi could see their reflections in the glass, Winters and Isabel exchanging glances, Patricia's fingers frozen over her keyboard. Then I'd give you the strongest possible references and wish you well, Winters said. And I'd still fix the system because it needs fixing whether you're here to help or not. Then I'd say you're smarter than I gave you credit for, Isabel added. And I'd tell you to call me if you ever need anything, even if it's not a job. Naomi turned back to face them. I want to meet the other 4, the women you found. Before I make any decision, I want to hear their stories. Winters nodded. I can arrange that. Patricia? I'll contact them immediately, Patricia said, already typing. Would you like to meet them together or individually? Together. And I want it somewhere private, not in this building, not in a conference room where they're going to feel like they're being evaluated. Naomi's voice was steady now, clear with purpose. I want to meet them somewhere neutral. A cafe, maybe. Somewhere they can speak freely without worrying about who's listening. There's a place 3 blocks from here, Isabel offered. Le Jardin. French cafe, quiet, good coffee. I could reserve their private room for this afternoon if you'd like. Why would you help with this? Naomi asked. You're trying to recruit me away from here. Why facilitate a meeting that might make me stay? Isabel's smile was slight but genuine. Because whether you work for me or not, I'd like to think I'm not the kind of person who manipulates someone's choices. And honestly, I'm curious what 5 women who survived the same system have to say to each other. That's a conversation worth enabling. Patricia made the arrangements while Naomi stood by the window and tried to process the surreal trajectory of the past 24 hours. Yesterday morning, she'd been invisible. Now 2 successful people were competing for her labor, and she was about to meet 4 women whose lives had been running parallel to hers in ways none of them had known. The meeting's set for 2 p.m., Patricia announced. I've contacted all 4 women, explained the situation, and emphasized this is voluntary. They all agreed to come. What did you tell them exactly? Naomi wanted to know how this had been framed, whether they'd been given real choice or corporate pressure disguised as invitation. I told them that discrepancies had been found in their employment records, that the hotel was conducting an internal review, and that another employee who'd experienced similar issues wanted to speak with them privately before any official meetings took place. I gave them your name and made it clear they could decline without any professional consequences. It was more honest than Naomi expected. She nodded slowly. Thank you. I should get back to work, Isabel said, checking her phone. Ms. Carter, my offer stands. Take your time, think it through, and call me when you're ready to discuss details. Or call me to say no. Either way, I meant what I said about the references. She switched to French, the words precise and warm. Vous méritez mieux que ce qu'ils vous ont donné. N'oubliez jamais ça. You deserve better than what they gave you. Never forget that. Naomi responded in the same language. Je n'oublierai pas. Merci pour votre gentillesse. I won't forget. Thank you for your kindness. Isabel left, and the room felt larger without her presence. Winters stood, buttoned his jacket. I have meetings until noon, but I've cleared my afternoon. If you want me at this cafe meeting, I'll be there. If you want me nowhere near it, I'll respect that too. I don't know yet what I want, Naomi admitted. I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be invisible. Then take all the time you need to figure that out. You've earned it. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you're going to make the right choice, whatever that choice is. After he left, Patricia remained, gathering her materials with efficient movements. Can I say something off the record? Is anything ever really off the record? Fair point. Patricia smiled slightly. But I'm going to say it anyway. I've worked for Mr. Winters for 8 years. I've seen him fire people, promote people, make difficult decisions that affected hundreds of lives. Yesterday was the angriest I've ever seen him. Not the loud kind of angry, the cold kind. The kind that means someone crossed a line they didn't even know existed. Sofia Gonzalez crossed a line. Sofia Gonzalez exposed that the line had never really been there in the first place. That's what made him angry. Not that one manager was discriminating, but that the entire system allowed it to happen for 6 years without anyone noticing. Patricia closed her laptop. I'm not telling you this to influence your decision. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know that what happened to you mattered, not just to you, but to the people who should have protected you and didn't. Naomi didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded. Patricia left, and Naomi was alone in the conference room with its expensive furniture and its view of a city that looked different from 37 floors up. She pulled out her phone, opened the email from Isabel that had arrived overnight. The formal job offer was there: salary, benefits, relocation assistance, start date. Everything documented and official and real. She could say yes right now, could be on a plane to Brussels within 2 weeks, could leave Philadelphia and its gray skies and 6 years of invisible labor behind like a bad dream she'd finally woken from. But she kept thinking about Maria and Rosa and Jennifer and Carmen. 4 women she'd never met whose stories were echoes of her own. 4 women who'd filed transfer requests that disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. 4 women who'd kept showing up, kept working, kept surviving in a system designed to keep them exactly where they were. She wanted to hear their stories. Needed to hear them. Because maybe her story wasn't just hers. Maybe it was all of theirs, and maybe that meant something. The hours until 2 p.m. stretched like taffy. Naomi left the hotel, walked the 3 blocks to Le Jardin, ordered coffee she barely tasted, and tried to organize her thoughts into something coherent. She'd made lists in her head, questions to ask, points to clarify, ways to structure the conversation so it didn't feel like an interrogation or a therapy session. But when 2 o'clock arrived and the 4 women filed into the private room, all of Naomi's careful planning evaporated. Because they looked like her. Not physically. Maria was Latina. Rosa was Asian American. Jennifer was black. Carmen was light-skinned and could have been from anywhere in Latin America. But they had the same expression Naomi saw in the mirror every morning for 6 years. The look of people who'd learned to make themselves small, who'd trained their faces into professional neutrality, who'd survived by becoming the kind of invisible that didn't threaten anyone. I'm Naomi Carter, she said, though they already knew. I worked housekeeping for 6 years. Before that, I had a master's degree in linguistics and credentials. Most people spend a lifetime building. The hotel kept me cleaning toilets because I was too qualified to promote. Yesterday, I answered a phone I wasn't supposed to touch, and everything changed. She paused, looked at each of them. I asked you here because I need to know if I'm alone in this, or if what happened to me is part of something bigger. And I need to know before I decide whether to stay and try to fix it, or walk away and never look back. The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Maria spoke, her voice soft but steady. I filed 9 transfer requests in 4 years. I have a master's in education. I speak 3 languages. I spent 22 years teaching in Sao Paulo before I came here. Every request was denied because I lacked relevant experience. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I was teaching university students while Sofia Gonzalez was still in high school, but apparently I wasn't qualified to train hotel staff. Rosa went next. I passed my CPA exam. Do you know how hard that is? The pass rate is about 33%. I studied for 18 months while working 50 hours a week. I submitted my certification with my transfer request to accounting. Sophia told me they needed someone with practical hotel finance experience. I asked how I was supposed to get that experience if they wouldn't give me the opportunity to learn. She said that was my problem to solve, not hers. Jennifer's hands were clenched on the table. I managed a Marriott for 6 years before the recession hit, and I lost everything. Lost the job, lost my house, lost my savings trying to keep my mother in her nursing home. When I finally found work again, it was maintenance at the Regency. I thought it was temporary. That was 10 years ago. I filed 13 transfer requests. 13. They told me I was too valuable in my current position to move. Her voice cracked. Too valuable. Like that wasn't just another way of saying I was too black to be visible. Carmen was last, and when she spoke it was in Spanish first, as if the English was too hard to carry the weight of what she needed to say. I trained at the Instituto Culinario in Mexico City. I worked at restaurants you've heard of, places where people make reservations 6 months in advance. I came here for love. Stupid, I know. And when that fell apart, I needed work fast. They put me in the kitchen chopping vegetables. I asked to move up. They said my English wasn't good enough. My English is perfect. They just didn't want to listen to it. Naomi felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. How many of you knew about the others? That there were other women going through the same thing? They looked at each other, shook their heads. I thought it was just me, Rosa said quietly. I thought maybe I wasn't as good as I believed I was. That maybe passing the CPA didn't mean what I thought it meant. I blame myself, Maria added. I thought maybe my English wasn't clear enough, or my credentials from Brazil didn't count here. I stopped applying after the 9th rejection. It hurt too much to keep hoping. That's what they count on, Naomi said, the words emerging sharp and clear. They count on us blaming ourselves, thinking we're not good enough, not American enough, not white enough, not whatever enough. They count on us staying isolated, thinking we're the only ones suffering. Because the moment we start talking to each other, the moment we realize this isn't individual failure, but systematic discrimination, that's when we become dangerous. So what do we do? Jennifer asked. They're offering us positions now, better pay, better titles. Is that enough? Do we take what they're giving us and pretend the past 6, 10, 4 years didn't happen? I don't know, Naomi admitted. That's why I wanted to meet you all, because I can't make this decision alone. It's not just about me anymore, it's about all of us. And it's about everyone who comes after us. Carmen leaned forward. What exactly are they offering you? Naomi explained both offers, the hotel's liaison position, Isabel's opportunity in Brussels. She laid it all out honestly, including her uncertainty, her anger, her fear that accepting either offer might mean endorsing the system that had harmed them. But you have a choice, Rosa said. That's more than most of us get. I'm taking the finance position because I need to pay off my CPA exam loans, and I can't afford to be principled about it. That's the truth. Is it justice? No. But it's survival, and sometimes that has to be enough. I'm taking the training position, Maria said. Not because I forgive them, but because I want to make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to the next person who walks through those doors with a degree and a dream. If I can change even one policy, prevent even one person from spending years invisible, that's worth more than my pride. Jennifer was quiet for a long time. I don't know yet. They're offering me assistant manager. It's a good position, but every time I think about walking into that building in a suit instead of coveralls, I feel sick, like I'm betraying the woman who survived the past 10 years by pretending she didn't exist. How do you reconcile that? How do you become the thing they finally decided you're worthy of being? You don't reconcile it, Carmen said firmly. You hold both truths. You were always worthy. They just finally decided to see it. Those are separate facts. One doesn't erase the other. They talked for 2 more hours, their voices rising and falling like waves, anger and grief and bitter humor mixing into something that felt almost like solidarity. They shared stories Naomi recognized in her bones. The daily microaggressions, the jiazhuang budong when speaking their native languages might make guests uncomfortable, the performance of gratitude for crumbs while watching less qualified people ascend to positions they'd been denied. By the time they left the cafe, nothing was resolved. But Naomi felt different, lighter somehow, like the weight she'd been carrying had been distributed among 5 pairs of shoulders instead of one. "Whatever you decide," Maria said at the door. "Thank you for this, for making us visible to each other. That matters more than you know." Naomi watched them disperse into the city, these 4 women whose lives had touched hers in ways the hotel's carefully constructed hierarchies had tried to prevent. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call she'd been avoiding all day. Marcus Winters answered on the second ring. "Miss Carter, I want to meet with you and the 4 women together, tomorrow morning. Not in the hotel, somewhere neutral. And I want you to bring every single transfer request that was denied over the past 10 years, every one, with the names of who reviewed them and the reasons given for denial. That's a lot of requests. Then you better start compiling them now, because if I'm going to consider staying, if any of us are going to consider building something better out of this wreckage, we need to see the full scope of what we're dealing with. No more partial truths, no more convenient revelations. Everything. On the table. Tomorrow morning." There was a pause. Then, quietly, "I'll have the files ready. Where do you want to meet?" "Le Jardin, private room, 9 a.m. And Mr. Winters? Come alone. No Patricia, no lawyers, no HR directors, just you and the truth." "Agreed." Naomi hung up and stood on the Philadelphia sidewalk, watching the afternoon fade into evening. She didn't know yet what tomorrow would bring, what she'd decide after seeing the full scope of the hotel's systematic discrimination. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was done being invisible. And so were the 4 women whose stories had become forever intertwined with her own. The question now wasn't whether she was valuable. It was whether the Regency Grandeur Hotel was valuable enough to deserve the labor of 5 women who'd already given them more than they'd earned. Tomorrow, she'd find out. Marcus Winters arrived at Le Jardin 15 minutes early, carrying 2 banker's boxes that looked heavy enough to contain the weight of institutional failure. Naomi watched him through the cafe window as he struggled with the door, boxes balanced precariously, and something about seeing a billionaire wrestling with physical evidence of his company's discrimination felt almost poetic. She didn't move to help him. Let him carry it, she thought. Let him feel the weight. The private room was smaller in morning light, the windows facing east so the sun cut sharp angles across the table. Naomi had arranged the chairs deliberately, 5 on one side, 1 on the other. She wanted Winters to sit alone, wanted him to feel what it was like to face collective judgment rather than dispense individual mercy. Maria arrived next, still in her housekeeping uniform because her shift started at 10. Then Rosa, who'd taken the morning off from what was technically still her housekeeping position. Jennifer came in looking exhausted, like she'd spent the night wrestling with demons that had names like pride and pragmatism. Carmen was last, her chef's jacket smelling faintly of onions and morning prep work. They took their seats on one side of the table without discussion, a united front that hadn't existed 48 hours ago. Winters sat across from them, alone with his boxes of shame, and Naomi felt a surge of something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't mercy either. "Open them," she said without preamble. Winters lifted the lid off the first box, pulled out a stack of folders easily 3 inches thick. "These are transfer requests from the past 10 years. I had my team work through the night pulling files. What we found was worse than I anticipated." "How much worse?" Rosa's voice was steady, but her hands were clenched under the table. "In 10 years, 247 transfer requests were filed by hourly employees seeking to move into salaried positions. Of those, 189 were denied. That's a denial rate of 76.5%. Winters pulled out a printed spreadsheet, slid it across the table. Of the 189 denied requests, 167 came from women of color. That's 88%. The numbers hung in the air like an indictment. Jennifer picked up the spreadsheet, her eyes scanning the data with the precision of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. "What about the 58 that were approved?" she asked. "Let me guess. White employees, male employees, people who fit a certain profile." 42 were white employees, 38 were male, and 29 were both white and male. Winters didn't flinch from the statistics. "The pattern is undeniable. The system wasn't just biased, it was designed to preserve a specific hierarchy." "Sofia Gonzalez isn't white," Maria pointed out. She's Salvadoran. How does she fit into this pattern? Sophia was promoted to head of housekeeping 12 years ago by the previous ownership group. She learned to survive in the system by enforcing its rules more strictly than the people who created them. It's not uncommon. Minorities in middle management often become the most zealous gatekeepers because they believe it protects their own position. Winters opened the second box. But Sophia wasn't alone. We found similar patterns in maintenance, kitchen staff, and facilities management. Different managers, same outcomes. The problem wasn't one person, it was structural. So fire them all, Carmen said flatly. Fire every manager who denied these requests and start over. I could do that, but it wouldn't solve the underlying problem. Winters pulled out another document, this one bound in plastic covers. This is our employee handbook from 2015. The section on internal transfers requires that applicants demonstrate cultural alignment and professional presentation standards before being considered for promotions. Those terms are subjective enough to justify almost any decision. They're coded language for discrimination. Naomi took the handbook, flipped to the relevant section. The words looked innocuous on paper, the kind of corporate speak that appeared in thousands of employee manuals across the country. But she could see how they'd been weaponized, how cultural alignment could mean not too ethnic, how professional presentation could mean not too black, not too accented, not too obviously other. Who wrote this? She asked. A consulting firm we hired in 2014 to standardize our HR practices across all properties. They came highly recommended, worked with Fortune 500 companies, charged us $400,000 for their expertise. Winters' jaw tightened. They sold us discrimination with a professional polish, and we paid them for the privilege. And you're just now noticing? Rosa's voice dripped with skepticism. You paid $400,000 for a handbook that's been in use for 11 years, and you never thought to question whether cultural alignment might be problematic. No, I didn't. Winters met her eyes directly. I trusted the people I hired to manage these issues. I believed that delegation was leadership. I was wrong, and the cost of my wrongness is sitting in these two boxes and in the lives of nearly 200 people who were denied opportunities they deserved. Is this the part where you apologize and we're supposed to forgive you? Jennifer's voice was hard. Because I'm not interested in absolution theater. I want to know what happens next, not what you're sorry for, what you're going to do. That's why I brought these files. Because what happens next depends on what you're willing to help me build. Winters pulled out a folder from the second box, opened it to reveal architectural drawings and organizational charts. I'm proposing a complete restructuring of our HR and advancement systems, new policies written by outside experts in employment law and diversity, a promotion review board that includes hourly employees, not just management, mandatory training on unconscious bias for every manager and executive, and an internal advocacy office where employees can report barriers to advancement without fear of retaliation. He spread the documents across the table. But here's what I need you to understand. I can implement all of these changes, and they'll still fail if the people who experience the discrimination aren't involved in building the solution. I need you 5 to be part of this, not as tokens, not as diversity hires, but as experts in exactly what went wrong and how to fix it. You want us to fix the system that broke us, Maria said quietly. That's what you're asking. I'm asking you to help build something better from the wreckage, and I'm offering to compensate you appropriately for that labor. Winters pulled out 5 envelopes, slid them across the table. These are revised offers, increased salaries, signing bonuses to compensate for lost wages from previous years, and a seat on the newly formed Employee Advocacy Board with decision-making authority over promotion reviews. Naomi opened her envelope. The number made her breath catch, $95,000 base salary, matching Isabel's offer, plus a $50,000 signing bonus and equity options in the company. The title read, Director of Global Language Services and Cultural Integration. You matched the Brussels offer, she said. I matched it, and I'm offering you something she can't. The chance to make sure this never happens again. Not just here, but potentially across the hospitality industry. If we get this right, if we build a model that actually works, other hotels will have to follow or lose talent to us. You're not just fixing one building, you're potentially transforming an entire sector. That's a pretty speech, Rosa said, but she was staring at her own envelope with an expression Naomi couldn't quite read. But speeches don't pay student loans. Speeches don't give me back the 3 years I spent overqualified and underpaid while you trusted the wrong people. You're right, they don't. Winters' voice was quiet now, stripped of corporate polish. Nothing I offer can give you back time. The best I can do is make sure the future costs you less than the past did. Carmen opened her envelope, read the contents twice, then looked up with tears streaming down her face. You're making me executive chef. Not sous chef. Executive chef of the signature restaurant. You trained at one of the most prestigious culinary institutes in Mexico and worked at restaurants I can't afford to eat at. Executive chef is the position you should have had 5 years ago. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm correcting an injustice. Winters paused. But Carmen, I need you to understand something. If you take this position and the restaurant fails, if the reviews are bad, or the numbers don't work, I will not protect you because of the circumstances that brought you here. You'll succeed or fail based on your actual performance, not on guilt or sympathy. Is that clear? Crystal clear. Carmen wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. And I don't want protection. I want a chance to prove what I always knew, that I belonged in that kitchen as a leader, not as the person chopping onions for someone less qualified. Jennifer was reading through the architectural plans, her finger tracing the proposed changes to the organizational structure. This advocacy board, you're saying it has actual power? It's not just a suggestion box with a fancy name. It has binding authority over all promotions from hourly to salaried positions. Management can recommend, but the board has to approve. And the board composition is majority hourly employees selected by secret ballot every 2 years. Winters pointed to a section of the document. It's modeled after worker cooperative structures, but adapted for corporate hierarchy. It's experimental. It might fail. And if it succeeds, it will fundamentally alter power dynamics in every one of our properties. Why would you give up that control? Jennifer's skepticism was evident. You're the owner. Why would you voluntarily limit your authority? Because authority without accountability is how we got here. Because I'd rather build something sustainable than maintain something broken. Winters leaned back in his chair. And honestly, because I'm gambling that you 5 are smart enough to build something better than what I could create alone. The silence that followed was different from before. Less hostile, more contemplative. Naomi watched her fellow survivors process the information, saw the calculations happening behind their eyes. This wasn't a simple choice between justice and pragmatism. It was something more complex, more fraught with the possibility of both transformation and failure. I want to see the consulting firm's contract, Rosa said suddenly. The one from 2014, the firm that wrote the discriminatory handbook. I want to see exactly what you paid for and what they delivered. Winters nodded to one of the boxes. Bottom of the second container. Full contract, deliverables, and correspondence. Rosa pulled out the file, started reading with the focused intensity of someone trained to find discrepancies in financial documents. Her expression shifted from concentration to anger to something colder and more calculating. This is fraud, she said flatly. They promised comprehensive diversity and inclusion policies. They charged you specifically for that deliverable. Then they gave you coded discrimination and billed it as best practices. She held up a page. Look at this invoice, $85,000 for diversity-focused promotion protocols. What they actually delivered was a system to exclude diverse candidates. You didn't just get bad advice, you were sold a product that did the opposite of what you paid for. Can we sue them? Naomi asked. Absolutely, Rosa said. The contract language is clear. They breached their agreement and caused measurable harm to the company. Specifically, they exposed you to discrimination liability. A good lawyer could recover the $400,000 plus damages. She looked at Winters. Have you talked to legal about this? Not yet. I only made the connection when I reviewed the files last night. Winters pulled out his phone. But if you're saying there's a case, I'll have our attorneys contact you directly. And Rosa, if you want to be involved in that lawsuit review, if you want to use your accounting skills to demonstrate the financial impact of their fraud, I'll make sure you're compensated as a consultant regardless of whether you accept the finance position. Rosa's expression shifted slightly. You'd pay me to help sue a company that hurt your company? I'd pay you to help hold accountable the people who sold us discrimination disguised as expertise. That benefits everyone. Winters met her gaze. And it might set a precedent that makes other consulting firms think twice before peddling coded bias as professional development. I'll consider it. Rosa set down the contract, but Naomi could see her mind working, calculating angles and possibilities. Maria had been quiet through most of the exchange, but now she spoke up, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who'd spent decades managing classrooms full of people who didn't want to listen. Mr. Winters, I need you to answer something honestly. If Naomi hadn't answered that phone, if she hadn't been standing in a room where you could witness her skills, would we be sitting here right now? Would you have ever looked at these files, ever questioned the system? The question cut through the corporate speak and the carefully constructed proposals to the heart of what they all needed to know. Winters was silent for a long moment, and Naomi appreciated that he didn't rush to answer, didn't offer easy reassurance. Honestly? I don't know, he said finally. I'd like to think I would have eventually noticed that some report or complaint or piece of data would have triggered an investigation. But the truth is, systems like this are designed to be invisible to the people they benefit. I'm a white man who inherited this hotel from my father. I've never had to fight to be seen. So no, Maria, I probably wouldn't have noticed. Not until it became a legal problem or a PR crisis or something that affected the bottom line in ways I couldn't ignore. At least you're honest about it, Jennifer said. That's more than most people in your position would admit. Honesty is the bare minimum. It doesn't earn me credit, it just means I'm finally operating in reality instead of convenient delusion. Winters gestured to the document spread across the table. But here's what I can promise you. I see it now. I can't unsee it. And whether you five accept these positions or walk away, I'm going to fix it. Because the alternative is being the kind of man who knows his company is grinding up talented people and does nothing about it. I'm not that man. I refuse to be that man. Pretty words, Carmen said. But I've heard pretty words before. From managers who promised me opportunities and then gave me more vegetables to chop. What makes your pretty words different? Nothing makes them different. Words are just words until they're backed by action and sustained over time. Winters stood, walked to the window. You want proof? Here it is. As of this morning, I've placed my shares in the hotel into a trust with binding conditions. If within 3 years we haven't reduced the promotion denial rate for women of color to below 25%, if we haven't achieved measurable pay equity across all departments, and if the Employee Advocacy Board hasn't been successfully implemented and maintained, I forfeit a significant portion of my ownership. It goes into a fund controlled by hourly employees for professional development and education. The room went silent. Naomi exchanged glances with the other women, saw her own shock reflected in their faces. You're betting your ownership on this, Rosa said, slowly. You're putting actual consequences on the line. I'm putting my money where my mouth is, because that's the only way you'll trust that this isn't performative. Winters turned back to face them. I'm not asking for your gratitude. I'm asking for your expertise. Help me build something that deserves the talent of people like you, or don't. And I'll do my best without you. But either way, the stakes are real now. Naomi felt something shift in the room, a collective recalibration of what was possible. This wasn't charity. This wasn't even justice. Not really. It was something stranger and more unpredictable. Accountability, with teeth, backed by a man who'd finally realized that good intentions without structural consequences were worth less than nothing. I need to see it in writing, Jennifer said. The trust, the conditions, all of it. I want documentation I can verify with independent legal counsel. I'll have the paperwork sent to you today. Winters returned to his seat. Anything else you need? Time, Maria said. We all need time to process this, to review the offers, to decide if we can work for a company that hurt us. Even with better compensation, even with new policies, that's not a decision to make quickly. Take the time you need. These offers don't expire. Winters started gathering the documents back into the boxes. But I want you to know something before you leave here. What happened to you five wasn't just wrong. It was stupid. This hotel has been hemorrhaging talent and paying consultants to help us do it more efficiently. You represent decades of combined expertise that we've been literally throwing away. Fixing this isn't charity, it's survival. If we don't change, we'll keep losing people like you to competitors who are smart enough to value what you bring. So we're good business sense now, Carmen said with a trace of bitterness. That's what it takes. Not morality, just economics. Unfortunately, yes. Most companies only change when it hurts the bottom line. Winters didn't sugarcoat it. But once the change happens, once the systems are rebuilt, the motivation stops mattering. What matters is that people like you don't have to fight for 6 years to be recognized. What matters is that the next Maria or Rosa or Jennifer or Carmen or Naomi walks in and gets treated the way they deserve from day one. They filed out of Le Jardin one by one, each carrying their envelope and their complicated feelings and the weight of decisions that would reshape their lives. Naomi was the last to leave, and Winters stopped her at the door. "I know you have the Brussels offer," he said quietly. "I know walking away would be easier than staying. But, Naomi, if you leave, if you take your 13 languages and your expertise and your justified anger to Belgium, I'll understand. But this place will lose the person most qualified to make sure what happened to you never happens again. That's not guilt. That's fact. You're asking me to sacrifice escape for transformation. That's a heavy ask from a man whose company stole 6 years of my life. I know. And if you say no, I'll write you the strongest recommendation letter you've ever read and wish you well. But I'm asking anyway, because you're the one who made me see this. You're the one who answered that phone. You're the catalyst for everything that's happening now. Don't you want to see what you've started through to completion?" Naomi held the envelope containing her revised offer, felt the weight of possibility and obligation pressing against her chest. "I'll think about it." She walked out into morning sunshine that felt different somehow, like the light itself had changed frequency. Her phone buzzed, a text from Rita in housekeeping asking what was happening, if the rumors about mass promotions were true, if things were really going to change. Naomi typed back, "I don't know yet, but I'm about to find out." She spent the rest of the day walking through Philadelphia like a tourist in her own life. She went to the library where she'd spent countless lunch breaks teaching herself new languages because she refused to let her mind atrophy. She went to the discount grocery where she'd learned to make $50 stretch across 2 weeks. She went to the bus stop where she'd stood in rain and snow and humidity, watching other people's lives happen while hers stayed frozen. By evening, she found herself back at her apartment, surrounded by the same books and the same furniture and the same evidence of a life lived on hold. She opened her laptop, pulled up the email from Isabelle Duchamp, read the Brussels offer again. Then she opened a new document and started writing. Not an acceptance letter, not yet, just thoughts, stream of consciousness in multiple languages because some feelings only made sense in French, some anger only had shape in Arabic, some hope only translated properly in Mandarin. She wrote about the 5 women at Le Jardin, about the 189 denied transfer requests, about the consulting firm that had sold discrimination disguised as expertise. She wrote about Sofia Gonzalez, who'd survived by becoming the enforcer of her own oppression. She wrote about Marcus Winters and his trust fund and his belated accountability. And she wrote about herself, about Naomi Carter, who'd spent 6 years invisible, who'd answered a phone that changed everything, who now held 2 futures in her hands and didn't know which one would hurt less. Her phone rang. Maria's name appeared on the screen. "I'm taking the position," Maria said without preamble. "I'm taking it because I spent 22 years teaching and I can't stand the thought of someone else going through what we did if I could have prevented it. I'm taking it because the advocacy board is real power, and I know how to use power to protect people. And I'm taking it because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been different if I'd stayed and fought." "That's your decision. It doesn't have to be mine." "I know, but Naomi, you're the one who brought us together. You're the one who made us visible to each other. If you walk away now, we lose the person who had the courage to expose this in the first place. We need you. This fight needs you." After Maria hung up, Rosa called. Then Jennifer, then Carmen, each with their own version of the same message. They were staying, they were fighting, and they wanted Naomi beside them. "I don't know if I can," Naomi told Carmen, the last call of the evening. I don't know if I can work for people who only valued me when it was convenient. That feels like betraying the woman who survived the past 6 years. Then don't do it for them, Carmen said. Do it for us. Do it for the women who'll come after us. Do it because you're the only one with the language skills to make sure this transformation actually happens across all their properties, in all their markets. You're not betraying yourself by staying. You're honoring yourself by refusing to let them waste another single day of your talent. When the calls finally stopped, Naomi sat in the dark and let herself cry for the first time since this had all started. She cried for the 6 years lost, for the versions of herself she'd had to bury, for the daily humiliations and the constant performance of gratitude for crumbs. She cried for Maria and Rosa and Jennifer and Carmen, for the 189 denied requests, for every person who'd been told they weren't enough. When the truth was, the system had never been designed to see them as enough. And then, when the tears stopped, she opened her laptop and started writing 2 emails. One to Isabelle Duchamp, thanking her for the opportunity and the kindness, explaining why she was going to decline. One to Marcus Winters, outlining her conditions for acceptance. Full transparency on all financial decisions, quarterly reports to the advocacy board, and a non-negotiable requirement that she be involved in hiring decisions for any position that involved language services or cultural consultation. She didn't send them immediately. She saved them as drafts, let them sit while she made tea and watched the city lights blink against the darkness. Tomorrow, she would press send. Tomorrow, she would commit to a future that scared her more than escape did. Tomorrow, she would walk back into the hotel that had tried to make her invisible and claim space as someone who refused to disappear. But tonight, she let herself exist in the liminal space between who she'd been and who she was becoming. Tonight, she was just Naomi Carter, translator of languages and survivor of systems, sitting in a small apartment and feeling the weight of 13 languages and 6 years of silence. Finally beginning to transform into something that looked almost like power. She pressed send on both emails at 6:47 a.m., watched them disappear into the digital ether, and immediately wanted to call them back. But email didn't work that way, and neither did transformation. Once you committed, once you said yes to the harder path, there was no rewinding to the safety of invisibility. Marcus Winters responded within 12 minutes. A single line. Your conditions are accepted. Welcome to the fight. Isabel's response took longer, arrived just after 9 with the warmth Naomi had come to expect from her. I'm disappointed, but not surprised. You're exactly the kind of person who chooses the harder right over the easier wrong. If you ever change your mind, or if Philadelphia fails to deserve you, my door remains open. Go make them better than they were. Naomi walked into the Regency Grandeur Hotel at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, wearing the same charcoal blazer, the same pressed slacks, but carrying herself differently. She didn't use the service entrance. She walked through the main lobby, past guests who didn't see her because they never had, past the front desk where she'd been invisible for 6 years, straight to the elevator that would take her to the executive floor. Her new badge worked. The 37th floor opened before her like a previously locked door, and Patricia was waiting with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased. Your office is ready, Patricia said, leading her down a hallway Naomi had only seen once before. Mr. Winters wanted you to have the corner suite with windows facing both east and south. Natural light for languages, he said. I'm not sure what that means, but he seemed convinced it mattered. The office was 3 times the size of Naomi's apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of walnut, bookshelves already lined with dictionaries and grammar texts in languages from Albanian to Zulu, a conversation area with chairs that probably cost more than her monthly rent. And on the desk, a nameplate that read, Dr. Naomi Carter, Director of Global Language Services and Cultural Integration. Doctor? Naomi touched the nameplate, the metal cool under her fingers. Mr. Winters had our research team pull your academic records. You completed everything for your PhD except the dissertation defense. He said you earned the title even if the university didn't grant it officially. Patricia set down a stack of folders. These are the files you'll need for the International Summit starting tomorrow. 17 delegations, 23 languages represented, and roughly 47 different cultural protocols you'll need to navigate. Think of it as a trial by fire. Tomorrow? Naomi's voice climbed. I just accepted the position this morning. Welcome to Crisis Management. The previous translation service canceled yesterday. Apparently, they couldn't meet our quality standards, which is corporate speak, for they made enough mistakes that the Korean delegation threatened to leave. You're inheriting a disaster and approximately 26 hours to fix it. Naomi opened the first folder, saw schedules and delegation lists and meeting agendas that would require perfect translation across linguistic and cultural boundaries. It was overwhelming and impossible, and exactly the kind of challenge she'd been training for her entire life. I'll need support staff, and I'll need to meet with each delegation head individually before the summit starts. She was already making lists in her mind, prioritizing languages and cultural sensitivities. Can you get me a conference room for the rest of today? And I'll need access to any previous correspondence with these delegations. Already done. Conference room B is yours until midnight if you need it. All correspondence is in the folders organized by delegation. Patricia paused at the door. Naomi, everyone's watching this, not just Mr. Winters, but the entire executive team, the board of directors, probably half the hotel staff. You succeed here. You prove that everything that happened before was discrimination, not merit. You fail, and there will be people who say Sofia Gonzalez was right to keep you in housekeeping. No pressure then. Enormous pressure. But if you couldn't handle it, you wouldn't be here. Patricia smiled slightly. Also, Maria wants to see you. She's in the training department on the 15th floor, and she says it's urgent. Naomi found Maria in an office that still smelled of fresh paint, surrounded by training manuals and curriculum materials spread across every available surface. She looked up when Naomi entered, and her expression was troubled. We have a problem, Maria said without greeting. I've been reviewing the current training materials for housekeeping and guest services. Naomi, they're teaching new employees the same discriminatory practices Sophia used. It's all coded, maintaining professional boundaries, appropriate staff-guest interaction protocols, cultural sensitivity in service delivery. But it's the same message. Know your place. Stay invisible. Don't aspire beyond your station. She held up a training manual, pointed to a highlighted section. Look at this. It explicitly instructs housekeeping staff not to engage in extended conversations with guests, even when asked direct questions. It says to defer all inquiries to management. That's not hospitality. That's systematic silencing. Naomi took the manual, read the passage Maria had marked. The language was careful, professional, completely benign on the surface. But she could see the pattern now, the way it had been designed to keep people like her from ever demonstrating capabilities beyond their assigned roles. How many people have been trained with these materials? Everyone hired in the past 10 years. We're talking hundreds of employees across all departments. Maria's voice shook with barely contained fury. I thought Sophia was the problem, but she was just enforcing a system that was built into the foundation. The training itself is discriminatory. Does Winters know? I called him 20 minutes ago. He's on his way here now. Maria stood, started pacing. Naomi, I don't know if I can do this. I thought I'd be writing new training materials, teaching people better practices. But this is deeper than I anticipated. This is archaeology, digging through layers of institutional bias trying to find something worth salvaging. The door opened and Marcus Winters entered, his expression grim. Behind him came Rosa and Jennifer, both looking like they'd been summoned urgently from their own new positions. Show me, Winters said without preamble. Maria walked him through the training materials, pointing out the coded language, the subtle barriers, the ways the system had been teaching employees to accept limited roles as natural order rather than imposed hierarchy. Winters' face grew darker with each example. Who wrote these? He asked. The same consulting firm from 2014, Rosa said quietly. She'd clearly been doing her own investigation. I pulled the contracts. They delivered training materials as part of their $400,000 package. These manuals, the employee handbook, the promotion protocols, it was all one comprehensive system designed to look professional while enforcing discrimination. So we don't just have a handbook problem, we have a training problem, a cultural problem, and a consulting firm that sold us institutional racism disguised as best practices. Winters sat down heavily. How many employees need to be retrained? Everyone, Jennifer said. She'd been quiet until now, but her voice carried authority. Everyone who's been through this system has internalized these messages. Management thinks this is how you run a hotel. Hourly employees think this is what professionalism looks like. We can't just train new people differently. We need to undo years of conditioning. That's going to take time we don't have, Winters said. The summit starts tomorrow. We have international delegations arriving in less than 24 hours. We can't shut down operations for mandatory retraining. Then we don't shut down, Naomi heard herself say. We start with the people who matter most for the summit. Front desk, concierge, guest services, housekeeping for the executive floors. We pull them for emergency training sessions today and tonight. Maria leads it, I assist with the language components, and we make it clear that the old protocols are canceled effective immediately. That's 60 people minimum, Patricia said, pulling out her phone and checking staff schedules. We'd need to bring in temporary workers to cover their shifts. The overtime alone would cost— I don't care what it costs, Winters interrupted. Make it happen. Pull whoever you need, pay whatever overtime is necessary. We're not having international delegations serviced by staff who've been trained to be discriminatory, even unconsciously. He turned to Maria. Can you design an emergency training program by end of day? I can design something workable. Not perfect, but functional. Maria was already making notes. But, Mr. Winters, this is just a Band-Aid. We need comprehensive retraining for everyone, and that's going to take months. Plus, we need to bring in outside experts to review everything we're teaching. I can't do this alone. You won't be alone. Hire whoever you need. Outside consultants, diversity experts, people who actually know what they're doing instead of charlatans who sell discrimination as professional development. Winters stood, and I want that consulting firm's name and contact information. We're suing them today. Already compiled, Rosa said, handing him a folder. Contract violations, fraudulent deliverables, measurable damages to company reputation and employee welfare. I outlined a preliminary case. Your attorneys should review it, but I'm confident we have grounds. Winters took the folder, tucked it under his arm. Rosa, I want you working directly with our legal team on this. Bill your time as a consultant at your previous accounting rate plus 50%. This lawsuit is going to send a message to every consulting firm that profits from coded discrimination. The rest of the day disappeared into controlled chaos. Maria drafted emergency training protocols while Naomi pulled together language-specific cultural briefings for the summit delegations. Jennifer coordinated staff schedules, finding ways to pull people for training without leaving the hotel understaffed. Rosa worked with the legal department, building a case against the consulting firm that had poisoned the hotel's culture with professional precision. By 6 p.m., they had 60 employees assembled in the hotel's largest conference room, a mix of front desk staff, concierge, guest services, and housekeeping. Many of them looked confused, some worried, a few defensive. Naomi recognized faces from her years in housekeeping, people who'd worked alongside her without ever really seeing her. Maria stood at the front of the room, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 2 decades teaching university students. Thank you all for being here. I know this is unexpected, and I know you're wondering why you've been pulled from your shifts. I'm Maria Santos. Some of you know me as a housekeeper. What you might not know is that I have a master's degree in education and spent 22 years teaching before I came here. The hotel kept me in housekeeping for 4 years despite my qualifications. She paused. Let that sink in. I'm telling you this because what we're about to discuss isn't theoretical. It's personal, and it's been affecting all of you whether you realized it or not. She pulled up the training manual on the screen behind her, highlighted sections glowing against the white background. This is what you were taught, that housekeeping staff shouldn't engage in extended conversations with guests, that you should defer all inquiries to management, that maintaining professional boundaries means knowing your place in the hierarchy. Maria's voice was steady, but Naomi could see the tension in her shoulders. What you weren't taught is that these protocols were designed to keep talented people invisible. They were designed to ensure that someone like me, someone with advanced degrees and languages and expertise, would spend years cleaning toilets without anyone ever discovering I could do more. A woman near the front raised her hand tentatively. Naomi recognized her. Teresa, housekeeping, 3rd shift, always arrived early and stayed late. Are you saying we were trained wrong? Teresa asked. I'm saying you were trained to enforce discrimination without knowing it, and that stops today. Maria clicked to the next slide. New protocols, effective immediately. When guests ask you questions, you answer them to the best of your ability. When you have skills or knowledge that could benefit the hotel, you share them. When you see opportunities for advancement, you pursue them. The old system that told you to stay small and quiet and invisible? That's over. What if management doesn't want us asking questions? Another voice called out. What if we get written up for overstepping? Then you report it to the new employee advocacy board, Jennifer said, stepping forward. I'm Jennifer Williams, assistant manager of operations. I spent 10 years in maintenance despite having a degree in hospitality management. The advocacy board exists specifically to prevent retaliation when employees challenge unfair practices. You have protection now. Use it. Naomi watched the room, saw the way people were processing this information. Some with hope, some with skepticism, some with the kind of guarded wariness that came from years of having hope disappointed. She thought about speaking up, adding her voice to Maria's and Jennifer's, but something held her back. These were her former colleagues, people who'd worked beside her while she was invisible. She didn't know yet if they were ready to see her as someone with authority. The decision was taken from her when Rosa stood and pointed directly at Naomi. That woman in the back is Dr. Naomi Carter. She has a master's degree in linguistics and speaks 13 languages fluently. For 6 years, she worked housekeeping while filing 17 transfer requests that were denied because the system was designed to keep her invisible. Rosa's voice cut through the murmurs. Tomorrow, she's going to be managing translation services for an international summit with delegations from 17 countries. The same woman you might have seen pushing a cleaning cart last week is now the most qualified person in this hotel to handle diplomatic protocol. That's not a miracle. That's what happens when we stop enforcing discrimination and start recognizing talent. The room went quiet. Every head turned to look at Naomi, and she felt the weight of their assessment, their recalibration of who she was and what she represented. How many of you have skills you've never mentioned? Maria asked into the silence. Languages you speak, degrees you earned, expertise you've been hiding because you didn't think it mattered here. Slowly, hesitantly, hands started to rise. Naomi counted them, 12 hands, then 15, then 20, a third of the room. Starting today, it matters, Maria said firmly. Starting today, we want to know what you can do, not just what your job description says, but what you're actually capable of. Because this hotel has been wasting talent for too long, and that ends now. The training session lasted 4 hours. Maria walked them through new protocols, new expectations, new ways of thinking about their roles. Naomi contributed cultural briefings for the summit delegations, shared language basics that would help staff provide better service. Jennifer explained the advocacy board and the new promotion review process. Rosa talked about the lawsuit against the consulting firm, made it clear that this wasn't just internal reform, but external accountability. By the time they finished, it was after 10 p.m. The employees filed out looking exhausted and energized in equal measure, carrying materials Maria had prepared and a sense that something fundamental had shifted in the building's foundation. Naomi stayed behind, helping Maria collect materials and shut down the presentation equipment. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Maria spoke. I was terrified, she admitted. Standing up there, telling them their training was discriminatory. I kept thinking they'd push back, tell me I was wrong, defend the system because it was familiar. But they didn't. No, they listened. And more than that, they believed us. Because we weren't theoretical. We were proof that the system had failed. Maria sat down, suddenly looking every one of her years. But Naomi, this was just 60 people. We have 400 employees across all shifts. How do we scale this? How do we reach everyone with the same message without it turning into corporate propaganda that people tune out? We don't do it alone. Naomi pulled out her phone, started typing notes. We need those outside experts Winters mentioned. People who specialize in organizational culture change, who can design training that actually works instead of reinforcing bias with a professional polish. We need to involve hourly employees in designing the curriculum, not just receiving it. And we need to make this ongoing, not a one-time event. Culture change takes years. Years we might not have if tomorrow's summit goes badly. Then we'd better make sure tomorrow goes perfectly. Naomi left the hotel at midnight, exhausted in ways that went beyond physical tiredness. Her mind was still racing through preparation for the summit, through language protocols and cultural sensitivities, and the thousand ways translation could go wrong when diplomacy was on the line. She took a cab home instead of the bus, a luxury she could afford now with her new salary, though the habit of frugality made her feel guilty about the expense. The apartment was dark and quiet, exactly as she'd left it 14 hours ago, but it felt different somehow, smaller than it had before, like she'd outgrown it in the space of a single day. Her phone buzzed, a text from Carmen. Executive chef orientation is brutal. They expect me to redesign the entire menu within 2 weeks. I'm terrified and exhilarated and I haven't slept. Is this what having a real career feels like? Naomi smiled, typed back, I think it is. Welcome to the terror. Another text, this from Rita in housekeeping. Everyone's talking about the training session, about you, about all 5 of you. Some people are angry you left us behind. Some people think you're heroes. I don't know what I think yet, but I wanted you to know it's complicated down here. That message hurt more than Naomi expected. She hadn't considered how her elevation might look to the people still in housekeeping, still wearing the uniform she'd shed. She'd been so focused on fixing the system that she hadn't thought about the emotional complexity of ascending while others remained. She called Rita instead of texting back. I didn't abandon housekeeping, Naomi said when Rita answered. I know it might look that way, but I didn't say you abandoned us, Rita interrupted gently. I said it's complicated, because it is. You deserve this, Naomi. Everyone knows you deserve it, but it's hard to watch someone escape while you're still here, you know? Even when you're happy for them, there's still this little voice asking, why not me? Why am I still invisible? Then let's make you visible. You've been here 18 years, Rita. What do you want to do that you've never been asked? The silence on the other end stretched so long, Naomi thought the call had dropped. Then Rita's voice came back, thick with emotion. I want to train new housekeeping staff. I want to teach them the right way to do this work, not just the cleaning, but the dignity of it. How to take pride in making spaces beautiful without being made to feel like you're less than the people using those spaces. I want young people coming into housekeeping to know they're starting something, not stuck in something. Then that's what you'll do. I'll talk to Maria tomorrow. We need experienced housekeeping staff to help redesign the training program. People who know the work from the inside, who can teach it with respect instead of condescension. Would you be interested? Are you serious? Rita's voice cracked. Naomi, I'm 62 years old. I never finished high school. I'm not qualified to. You have 18 years of experience and institutional knowledge that no degree can match. That makes you exactly qualified. Will you do it? Yes. The word came out like a prayer. Yes, I'll do it. After they hung up, Naomi sat in the dark and thought about Rita, about Teresa from the training session, about all the people still wearing uniforms and wondering if they'd ever be more than invisible. She thought about the consulting firm that had sold discrimination as expertise, about Sofia Gonzalez who'd enforced oppression to protect her own position, about the systematic ways talent got buried under assumptions and coded language, and the comfortable inertia of hierarchy. She thought about tomorrow's summit, and the 17 delegations, and the 47 different ways translation could fail or succeed. She thought about this fact that her first major task as Director of Global Language Services was essentially a high-stakes performance where one mistake could undermine everything she'd fought for. And she thought about the 5 women who'd sat at Le Jardin and decided to stay and fight instead of escape. About Maria redesigning training protocols at midnight, about Rosa building a legal case against institutional discrimination, about Jennifer learning to manage the operations that had kept her in maintenance for a decade, about Carmen redesigning a menu while fighting imposter syndrome and the ghost of every vegetable she'd chopped for someone less qualified. They were all terrified. They were all exhilarated. They were all discovering what it felt like to have careers instead of survival jobs, to be seen instead of invisible, to matter in ways the system had told them they never could. Naomi finally climbed into bed at 2 a.m. with her alarm set for 5. 3 hours of sleep before the most important day of her professional life. 3 hours before she'd walk into conference rooms full of diplomats and corporate executives and prove that the woman in the housekeeping uniform had always been exactly as valuable as she'd known she was. 3 hours before she'd either validate everything they'd fought for or become evidence that Sofia Gonzalez had been right to keep her invisible. The alarm seemed to ring the moment she closed her eyes, and Naomi woke to gray dawn light and the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. She showered in water as hot as she could stand, dressed in her best suit. Not the blazer from yesterday, but a navy ensemble she'd bought years ago for job interviews that never happened, that had hung in her closet like a promise she'd stopped believing in. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone she barely recognized. Not because she'd changed physically, but because the expression was different. The perpetual guardedness was gone, replaced by something harder to define. Determination, maybe. Or defiance. Or the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from choosing the difficult path when the easy one was right there, available, waiting. She grabbed her materials, caught the early bus because habits die hard even when you can afford cabs, and arrived at the hotel at 6:30 to find Marcus Winters already in the lobby, surrounded by staff members coordinating final preparations for the summit. He saw her, broke away from the group, met her halfway across the marble floor that she'd mopped 1,000 times. "Are we ready?" he asked. Naomi thought about the emergency training session, about the cultural briefings she'd prepared until midnight, about the 17 delegations and 47 protocols, and the infinite ways this could go wrong. She thought about Rita and Teresa and all the people still invisible, watching to see if the system had really changed or if this was just a performance. "No," she said honestly. "We're not ready, but we're going to do it anyway, because that's what transformation looks like. Imperfect, terrifying, and happening whether we feel prepared or not." Winters smiled, the expression carrying something like respect. "Then let's show them what we're capable of." The delegates started arriving at 8 a.m., and Naomi discovered that 6 years of invisibility had taught her skills no classroom could provide. She knew how to read a room, how to anticipate needs before they were spoken, how to move through spaces without disrupting them. The difference now was that she did it while being seen, while speaking 13 languages with confidence, while commanding respect instead of remaining forgettable. The Korean delegation arrived first, and Naomi greeted them in formal Korean, the honorifics precise, the cultural protocols observed with the care of someone who understood that language was more than vocabulary. It was relationship and power, and the subtle dance of being heard. Their lead negotiator's expression shifted from skepticism to surprise to something approaching approval. "Your accent is Seoul dialect," he said in Korean. "Where did you study?" "Ewha Women's University, Summer Intensive Program 2016, Naomi replied. "I specialized in business Korean with focus on diplomatic protocol. I'm honored to facilitate your delegation's needs during the summit." By noon, she'd greeted 17 delegations in their native languages, navigated cultural protocols from Chinese business card exchange to French formal address structures, and prevented 3 potential diplomatic incidents through careful translation that preserved intent while smoothing cultural friction. She was exhausted and electric, running on adrenaline and coffee and the fierce satisfaction of doing exactly what she'd been trained for, what she'd always been capable of, what the system had tried to bury for 6 years. And everyone was watching, not just the delegates, but the hotel staff, the executive team, the board members who'd gathered to observe this experiment in accountability. She could feel their assessment, their recalibration, their slow recognition that the invisible woman had always been here, waiting for someone to look. The crisis came at 2:15 p.m. during the trade negotiation session between the Belgian textile delegation and a consortium of Korean manufacturers. Naomi was facilitating the discussion, moving seamlessly between French, Dutch, Korean, and English as the conversation required, when the Belgian representative made a comment about quality standards that, translated literally, would have been a devastating insult in Korean business culture. She caught it mid-sentence, the way you catch a glass before it hits the floor. Instead of translating the exact words, she pivoted, rephrased the concern in terms that preserved the Belgian concern about specifications while avoiding the implication of inferior Korean craftsmanship. The Korean delegation nodded, responded thoughtfully, and the negotiation continued without either side realizing how close they'd come to diplomatic disaster. But Isabelle Duchamp knew. She was sitting in the back of the room, observing as a guest consultant, and when the session broke for coffee, she pulled Naomi aside with an expression that mixed admiration and vindication. "That was extraordinary," Isabelle said in French. "You didn't just translate, you prevented a cultural collision that would have ended these negotiations before they started. That's not skill. That's artistry." It's what I've always been able to do, Naomi replied in the same language. The hotel just never asked. Their loss. But I'm glad you stayed. Watching you work, this is where you belong. Not escaping systems, but transforming them from the inside. Isabel smiled slightly. Though my offer still stands if Philadelphia ever stops deserving you. The afternoon sessions continued without incident, but Naomi could feel exhaustion creeping in around the edges of her adrenaline. 13 languages in 6 hours, navigating protocols and power dynamics, and the constant pressure of knowing that one mistake could undermine everything. Her mind felt stretched thin, like fabric pulled too tight across a frame. At 4 p.m., Marcus Winters found her in the conference room during a break between sessions. His expression was troubled in a way that made Naomi's stomach clench. "We have a problem," he said quietly. "The consulting firm we're suing? They filed a counterclaim. They're alleging defamation and breach of contract, claiming we're using them as a scapegoat for our own discriminatory practices. Can they do that?" "They can file whatever they want. Whether they'll win is another question." Winters rubbed his face tiredly. "But they're also threatening to release information about the hotel's employment practices to the media. They're claiming they warned us about potential discrimination issues in 2014, and we ignored their recommendations." "Did they warn you?" "I don't know. I need to review the complete correspondence file, which is apparently hundreds of pages of emails and reports. Rosa's going through it now, but she can't do it alone." He paused. "I know you're in the middle of the summit. I know I'm asking too much. But Naomi, if they release damaging information to the press right now, while we're hosting 17 international delegations, it could destroy not just the hotel's reputation, but the credibility of everything we're trying to build." Naomi looked at the schedule in her hands. 3 more sessions today, starting in 20 minutes. Then evening receptions, cultural events, dinner protocols that would run until midnight. She was already operating on 3 hours of sleep and willpower. "Get Rosa up here with the files," she said. "I'll review them between sessions. If there's correspondence in languages other than English, I can translate faster than any service you'd hire. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this to save the hotel's reputation. I'm doing it because if we lose this fight, every our employee who believed change was possible is going to learn that the system protects itself no matter what." "I understand. And Naomi, thank you for staying, for fighting, for being better than we deserved." "I'm not better than you deserved. I'm exactly what you always had. You just finally bothered to look." Rosa arrived 15 minutes later with boxes of files and the kind of determined fury that came from discovering new layers of institutional betrayal. She spread documents across the conference table while Naomi gulped coffee that had gone cold and tried to shift her brain from diplomatic translation to legal analysis. "Here's what I've found so far," Rosa said, her accounting precision evident in how she'd organized the materials. The consulting firm did include warnings about potential discrimination in their initial assessment, but they buried them in appendices and technical language, and their recommendations were contradictory. On page 47, they warn about subjective promotion criteria. On page 93, they recommend implementing the exact subjective criteria they just warned about. "So they covered themselves," Naomi said, scanning the documents. "They created paper trails that could support either narrative, that they warned us, or that they sold us discrimination, depending on who's reading and what they're looking for." "Exactly. And there are emails in French and German that I can't translate accurately. I'm using online tools, but I need to know the nuance, whether these are warnings or recommendations or just corporate cover-your-ass ambiguity." Naomi pulled the French correspondence toward her, started reading while part of her brain continued preparing for the next summit session. The documents were masterpieces of corporate doublespeak, technically correct, practically useless, designed to provide the consulting firm with plausible deniability regardless of outcome. "This one," she said, pointing to an email from 2014, "it's warning about the legal risks of cultural alignment requirements. But the warning is phrased as a suggestion to document the criteria more carefully, not to eliminate them. They're not saying this is discriminatory, sis. They're saying make sure you can defend it in court. Can we use that?" Rosa was taking notes, her mind clearly building the legal argument in real time. We can use it to show they knew the system was legally problematic and sold it to us anyway. They weren't warning us to change course. They were teaching us how to discriminate more carefully. Naomi moved to the German documents, translated them quickly. Same pattern here. Acknowledge the risk, recommend better documentation, never suggest actually fixing the underlying bias. They worked through the files for 40 minutes, Naomi translating and analyzing while Rosa built a counter-narrative that would undermine the consulting firm's claims. By the time Naomi had to return to the summit, they had enough evidence to demonstrate that the firm hadn't been a good-faith advisor, but a sophisticated enabler of discrimination. I'll get this to the legal team tonight, Rosa said, gathering materials. But Naomi, this goes beyond one hotel. If we can prove this firm sold discriminatory systems to multiple companies while maintaining plausible deniability, this could be a class action. We could expose an entire industry of consultants who profit from coded bias. One fight at a time, Naomi said, but she felt the weight of possibility. Not just transforming one hotel, but potentially dismantling the infrastructure that allowed discrimination to flourish under professional polish. The evening sessions tested every skill Naomi had developed in 6 years of invisibility and 2 decades of linguistic training. A dispute over contract terms between Japanese and Brazilian delegations required her to navigate not just language, but fundamental cultural differences in how agreements were conceptualized. A misunderstanding between French and Arabic speakers about meeting protocols threatened to derail a partnership before it started. Through it all, Naomi moved between languages and cultures with the fluidity of someone who'd spent years proving she belonged in rooms that questioned her presence. By 10 p.m., she was functioning on autopilot and fierce determination. The formal dinner was winding down, delegates mingling over coffee and dessert, the day's tension smoothed by successful negotiations and cultural bridge building. Naomi stood near the windows overlooking Philadelphia, letting herself breathe for the first time in 16 hours. You did it. Maria appeared beside her, carrying 2 glasses of wine. The summit was flawless. I've been monitoring social media. 3 delegations have already praised the hotel's translation services publicly. The Korean trade minister called you exceptionally skilled in an interview. Naomi took the wine, sipped it carefully. It was one day. We have 2 more days of summit, then weeks of follow-up, then the real work of systematic change begins. This was just proving we could function. Actually transforming the institution, that's going to take years. But we proved something today. That the 5 of us weren't kept down because we lacked ability. That the system failed, not us. Maria's voice caught. Do you know how many people told me today that they'd filed transfer requests they'd forgotten about? That they'd stopped believing they could be more than their current positions? Watching you work, watching all of us step into roles we deserved, it reminded them that invisible doesn't mean incapable. How are the others handling it? Jennifer? Carmen? Jennifer is redesigning the entire operations workflow. She's finding inefficiencies that have cost the hotel thousands of dollars annually, and she's doing it with the confidence of someone who finally gets to use her actual skills. Carmen is terrifying the kitchen staff and creating dishes that are already getting buzz from food critics who heard about the menu redesign. Maria smiled. We're exhausted and overwhelmed and occasionally convinced we're going to fail spectacularly, but we're also more alive than we've been in years. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights blur against the darkness. Naomi thought about the woman who'd answered a phone 3 days ago, who'd been suspended and then elevated and then thrust into battle against systems that had spent years keeping her invisible. She felt different now. Not better necessarily, but more solid somehow. Like she'd finally stopped apologizing for occupying space. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Winters. Board of Directors wants to meet with you tomorrow morning before the summit sessions start. They have questions about today's performance and the consulting firm situation. 7 a.m., executive boardroom. Naomi showed the text to Maria, who winced sympathetically. They're going to interrogate you. Make sure you're really qualified, that today wasn't a fluke, that investing in you and the rest of us wasn't a mistake. Maria squeezed her arm. But you've got this. You've been proving yourself to people who doubted you your entire life. This is just another room of people who need to learn what you already know. The board meeting started at 7 a.m. sharp in a room Naomi had never seen before. All dark wood and leather chairs, and the accumulated power of people who made decisions that affected hundreds of lives. 12 board members sat around the table, mostly white, mostly male, mostly older. The kind of people who'd built careers in an era when discrimination wasn't systemic, it was just how things worked. Marcus Winters sat at the head of the table, his expression neutral in a way that made Naomi think he'd already had difficult conversations before she arrived. "Dr. Carter, thank you for joining us," said a woman Naomi recognized as Eleanor Hartfield, the board chair. "We've reviewed yesterday's summit proceedings and the feedback from international delegations. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. However, we have concerns about the circumstances that led to your current position and the broader changes being implemented across the hotel." "What concerns specifically?" Naomi kept her voice level, professional. "We're concerned that the hotel's response to Ms. Gonzalez's management practices has been disproportionate, that we're overcorrecting based on a few isolated incidents rather than systemic issues." This from a man named Richard Chen, whose biographical information Naomi had pulled last night showed he'd made his fortune in real estate development. "The restructuring you've proposed, the advocacy board, the mandatory retraining, the promotion of multiple employees simultaneously, it's expensive and disruptive. We need assurance that this isn't political correctness run amok." Naomi felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. She'd been preparing for skepticism about her qualifications. She hadn't prepared for them to question whether discrimination had actually occurred. "Mr. Chen, with respect, 189 denied transfer requests from women of color over 10 years isn't a few isolated incidents. It's documented, systematic exclusion. That's not political correctness. That's math." "Numbers can be misleading without context," Eleanor said. "Not every denied transfer request indicates discrimination. Some people simply aren't qualified for the positions they seek." "Were you planning to test that theory?" Naomi's voice was getting sharper, but she didn't rein it in. "Because I can demonstrate my qualifications in 13 languages right now. Maria Santos can lecture you on pedagogical theory in 3 languages. Rosa Chen can walk you through complex financial analysis that would save this hotel hundreds of thousands annually. We're not hypothetical cases. We're sitting in rooms you spent years excluding us from, proving you were wrong." "Dr. Carter, no one is questioning your individual qualifications." This from another board member, a man whose name Naomi hadn't caught. "But we're concerned about the cost of these changes. The lawsuit against the consulting firm alone could cost millions in legal fees. The restructuring, the retraining, the new positions, it's a significant investment based on what may be interpersonal issues rather than institutional problems." Marcus Winters leaned forward, his voice carrying an edge Naomi hadn't heard before. "Let me be very clear about something. The cost of not making these changes is higher than any investment we're making now. We've been hemorrhaging talent for a decade while paying consultants to help us do it more efficiently. That's not an interpersonal issue. That's institutional malpractice." "But the timing," Eleanor pressed. "These changes are happening very quickly. We're concerned about proper due diligence, about making emotional decisions rather than strategic ones. The timing is urgent because we've wasted 10 years already." Winters pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. "This is the preliminary financial analysis Rosa Chen completed yesterday while simultaneously managing summit logistics. She identified $340,000 in annual operational inefficiencies that have gone unnoticed because the people who could spot them were too busy cleaning toilets. That's not emotional decision-making. That's finally listening to the expertise we've been paying for and ignoring." Naomi watched the board members review the analysis, saw the calculations sink in. This was the language they understood, not justice or fairness or the moral weight of systematic exclusion, but numbers. Return on investment, cost-benefit analysis. "Additionally," Naomi said, pulling out her own documentation, "yesterday's summit generated $2.4 million in new business agreements that were facilitated by accurate translation and cultural mediation. The previous translation service we used cost $45,000 for the same event last year and produced results that nearly caused diplomatic incidents. I did it better, faster, and at a fraction of the cost because I'm not a contractor billing by the hour. I'm an employee with investment in the hotel's success." She spread the contracts across the table, each one representing partnerships that wouldn't have happened without her intervention. The Belgian textile deal alone is worth $1.8 million over 3 years. The Korean manufacturing agreement is $600,000 annually. These aren't hypothetical benefits. This is money in the bank because you finally let someone with actual expertise do the work they were trained for. The room went quiet. Naomi could see the board members recalculating, shifting from ideological resistance to pragmatic assessment. They might not care about justice, but they cared about profit. And she just demonstrated that discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was financially stupid. What about the consulting firm's counterclaim? Eleanor asked. If they release damaging information to the media, it could affect our reputation and stock price. Let them release it, Rosa said from the doorway. Naomi hadn't heard her enter, but she stood there with the same quiet confidence she'd shown analyzing financial documents. I've been through their complete correspondence file. Every warning they claimed to have given us was undermined by their own recommendations. They didn't advise us against discrimination. They taught us how to do it carefully enough to avoid lawsuits. If they go public, we'll release the full documentation showing they profited from selling institutional bias as professional expertise. That's mutually assured destruction, Richard Chen said. Both sides would be damaged. Not equally. We're admitting our mistakes and demonstrating correction. They're professional consultants whose entire business model is based on companies trusting their advice. If we prove they sold discriminatory systems to multiple clients while maintaining plausible deniability, that's not just our problem. That's their entire industry exposed. Rosa moved into the room, placed a thick binder on the table. I've been researching their other clients. 15 companies in the past decade, all hospitality sector, all showing similar patterns of promotion denials for women and minorities after implementing their recommended systems. This isn't about one hotel. This is about dismantling an infrastructure of professional discrimination. The board members exchanged glances that Naomi couldn't quite read. She'd expected resistance, possibly termination, definitely skepticism. She hadn't expected Rosa to walk in with evidence of industry-wide corruption. If we pursue this, Eleanor said slowly, we're not just defending ourselves. We're taking on an entire consulting sector and the companies who use their services. The legal costs alone could be enormous. The costs of not pursuing it are higher, Winters said firmly. Because if we back down, if we settle quietly and move on, we're telling every employee who believed change was possible that we were performing. That we'd rather protect our comfort than dismantle the systems that hurt them. I'm not willing to do that. Neither am I, Naomi said. The words came out stronger than she expected, carrying 6 years of suppressed fury and 3 days of exhausting transformation. You can vote to reverse the changes, to settle with the consulting firm, to go back to business as usual. But if you do, you'll be doing it without me and without the 4 other women you just elevated. We're not interested in being tokens for corporate diversity theater. We're here to build something better, or we're not here at all. It was a bluff, partially. Naomi had nowhere else to go if they called it. No backup plan beyond Isabel's standing offer in Brussels. But she was tired of negotiating for dignity, tired of proving she deserved space she'd always belonged in. The silence stretched until Eleanor finally spoke. Mr. Winters, the board will need to discuss this privately. Dr. Carter, Ms. Chen, if you could give us the room. They filed out into the hallway, the heavy door closing behind them with the finality of judgment being passed. Rosa leaned against the wall, looking exhausted. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen you do, she said. Probably both. Naomi's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. But I meant it. I'm not staying if this turns into performance. If they're not serious about transformation, I'd rather walk away. Where would you go? Brussels? Isabel's offer is still open. Or somewhere else entirely. I've been invisible for 6 years. I can find a new city, a new start. What I can't do is spend the next 6 years pretending systematic change is happening while watching them protect the same structures that kept us down. They waited in the hallway for 45 minutes that felt like hours. Other employees passed by, some offering encouraging smiles. Some studying them with the careful neutrality of people who didn't want to be associated with potential failure. Naomi watched them and thought about all the invisible people in this building, all the buried expertise and silenced voices, all the versions of herself that existed behind uniforms and diminished expectations. The boardroom door finally opened. Marcus Winters emerged first, his expression unreadable, followed by Eleanor Hartfield. "The board has voted," Eleanor said, 8-4 in favor of continuing the current course. "We'll pursue the lawsuit against the consulting firm, maintain the advocacy board and restructuring plans, and support the systematic retraining. However, we're establishing quarterly review benchmarks. If the financial benefits don't materialize as projected, or if operational disruptions become unsustainable, we reserve the right to modify the approach." It wasn't unconditional support. It was provisional, probationary, contingent on proving that justice could be profitable. But it was enough. "Thank you," Naomi said, "because that's what you said when people agreed to stop discriminating against you as long as it made them money." "Don't thank us yet," Eleanor replied. "You've got 3 months to show measurable improvements in employee satisfaction, promotion rates, and operational efficiency. If those numbers don't move, this experiment ends, and we return to traditional management structures." After they left, Winters pulled Naomi and Rosa aside, his expression grim. 3 months is aggressive. The kind of culture change we're talking about typically takes years. "Then we'll do years of work in 3 months," Naomi said. "We'll just have to be better than they think we can be. Again." The next 8 weeks were a blur of 18-hour days and impossible deadlines. Naomi managed 3 more international summits while simultaneously developing language services protocols for the hotel's global expansion. Maria redesigned the entire training curriculum with input from hourly employees, creating programs that taught hospitality as skilled profession rather than subservient performance. Jennifer restructured operations to eliminate inefficiencies that had cost the hotel hundreds of thousands annually. Carmen's menu redesign got a glowing review in Philadelphia Magazine that brought in new customers and renewed interest in the hotel's dining program. And Rosa built the legal case against the consulting firm with the precision of someone who understood that numbers told stories when you knew how to read them. She documented patterns across 15 companies, identified common language in contracts and deliverables, demonstrated how the firm had systematically profited from selling discrimination disguised as professional development. The advocacy board held its first official meetings, with hourly employees questioning management decisions and demanding accountability in ways that made some executives visibly uncomfortable. Promotion rates for women of color increased by 43% in the first 2 months. Employee satisfaction scores, previously never measured, started trending upward as people realized their voices actually mattered. But the resistance was constant. Managers who'd built careers on the old system pushed back against new protocols. Some employees, comfortable with familiar hierarchies, resented the disruption. The consulting firm escalated their counterclaim, threatening reputation damage that could affect the hotel's international expansion. Board members who'd voted against the changes watched for any sign of failure, ready to say they'd been right about overcorrection. Naomi felt the pressure like physical weight, each success measured against the constant threat of reversal. She worked through exhaustion and doubt and the persistent voice that said maybe she'd been lucky with the summit. Maybe she couldn't sustain this level of performance. Maybe Sofia Gonzalez had been right about her limitations. But then she'd see Teresa from housekeeping teaching new employees about dignity and labor, using the training materials Maria had developed. Or she'd hear about Rosa identifying another operational inefficiency that saved money while improving worker conditions. Or she'd taste one of Carmen's new dishes and recognize the artistry that had been wasted on vegetable prep for 5 years. And she'd remember that they weren't lucky. They were exactly as qualified as they'd always been. The system had just finally stopped trying to bury them. The 3-month review came on a Wednesday morning that felt heavy with consequence. The entire executive team gathered, along with board members and the newly formed advocacy board. Patricia had prepared presentation materials documenting every metric, every change, every measurable outcome from 12 weeks of systematic transformation. Marcus Winters stood at the head of the conference room, and Naomi could see the tension in his shoulders, the awareness that he'd bet his ownership stake on this working. 3 months ago, we discovered that our hotel had been systematically discriminating against talented employees for over a decade. We committed to change, knowing it would be difficult and expensive and potentially unsuccessful. Today, we're reviewing the results. He clicked to the first slide, financial data displayed in neat columns. Employee turnover is down 37%. Operational costs are down $280,000 annually due to efficiency improvements. Revenue from international business is up $3.2 million, directly attributable to improved translation and cultural services. Guest satisfaction scores have increased by 22%. He clicked through more slides, each one demonstrating measurable improvement. Promotion rates, wage equity, employee satisfaction, operational efficiency. Every metric trending in the right direction. The consulting firm lawsuit is progressing. We've been joined by 3 other companies who experience similar patterns of discriminatory systems implemented under the guise of professional development. The case is attracting attention from employment law specialists and potentially leading to industry-wide reforms. Eleanor Hartfield stood, her expression still skeptical but less hostile than 3 months ago. The numbers are impressive, but numbers can be managed, manipulated to tell convenient stories. What about the qualitative changes? What about the culture that allowed discrimination to flourish for so long? Maria stood from the advocacy board section, carrying a folder that Naomi recognized as employee testimonials. The culture is changing because we're not just modifying policies. We're transforming who has power to make decisions. The advocacy board has reviewed 43 promotion requests in the past 3 months. We've approved 31, rejected 7 for legitimate qualification gaps, and identified 5 cases where management recommendations appeared to be based on bias rather than performance. In each of those 5 cases, we required additional justification and external review before making final decisions. She opened the folder, pulled out a single sheet. This is from an employee who's been in housekeeping for 6 years. She has a degree in hospitality management that no one ever asked about. She's now being trained as assistant manager because we created systems that actually identify talent instead of burying it. That's not managed numbers. That's changed lives. Jennifer stood next, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 10 years proving herself before anyone listened. Operations has identified and corrected 17 systematic inefficiencies that existed because managers assumed hourly employees couldn't understand complex systems. We've implemented feedback mechanisms that give every employee voice in identifying problems and proposing solutions. The cost savings are real, but more importantly, people feel invested in making the hotel succeed because they're finally treated as partners rather than equipment. Carmen was last. And when she spoke, it was with the confidence of someone whose food had just been featured in a James Beard Foundation spotlight. The kitchen was running on assumptions about who deserved to create versus who deserved to execute other people's ideas. I've promoted 3 line cooks to sous chef positions based on skill rather than credentials, and the menu has gotten more creative because we're pulling expertise from people who were never asked what they knew. That's culture change, not diversity theater, but actually valuing talent wherever we find it. The room was silent as the advocacy board members sat down. Naomi watched the executive team and board members process what they'd heard, saw the recalibration happening as they realized this wasn't cosmetic adjustment. This was fundamental restructuring of how power operated in the institution. The financial results meet our benchmarks, Eleanor said finally. The operational changes demonstrate sustainability. But I want to address something directly. She turned to Naomi. Dr. Carter, 3 months ago you told this board you wouldn't stay if we weren't serious about transformation. You issued an ultimatum that could have cost you everything. That was either remarkable courage or remarkable arrogance. Which was it? Naomi stood, felt the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. It was desperation. I'd spent 6 years being invisible while watching less qualified people advance. I'd fought for every opportunity and been denied them all. When you finally gave me a chance, it wasn't because you suddenly believed in fairness. It was because I happened to answer a phone in front of the right person at the right time. That's not a system worth staying in unless it fundamentally changes. And has it fundamentally changed? It's changing. Change takes time, and 3 months isn't enough to undo a decade of discrimination. But we've proven something important, that the talent was always here. The expertise was always here. The people capable of elevating this hotel were always here. You just spent years paying us not to use our abilities because the system was designed to keep us in predetermined places. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something Naomi didn't expect. She smiled. "You're right, and I apologize for being part of the board that let it happen." She turned to the other board members. "I move that we continue the current restructuring indefinitely, remove the quarterly review restrictions, and commit additional resources to expanding these changes across all company properties. All in favor?" The vote was unanimous this time. 12 hands raised, 12 acknowledgments that transformation wasn't temporary or conditional, it was permanent. After the meeting, Naomi found herself back in her corner office with windows facing east and south, natural light streaming across the desk that still felt too large, too permanent, too much like a future she'd stopped believing was possible. Her phone buzzed with congratulations from people who'd watched the presentation, from delegates she'd worked with during summits, from employees who'd filed transfer requests they'd stopped believing would ever be approved. But the message that mattered most came from Rita in housekeeping. "Training starts next week. I get to teach people that this work has dignity. Thank you for making someone finally see that I had something to offer beyond clean sheets." Naomi stood at the window watching Philadelphia move through its afternoon rhythms, thinking about all the invisible people in this city and every city, all the buried expertise and silenced voices waiting for someone to ask what they knew. She thought about the consulting firm that had profited from discrimination, about Sofia Gonzalez who'd enforced oppression to survive it, about the systems that were designed to preserve hierarchy rather than recognize talent. And she thought about 5 women who'd sat in a cafe and decided to fight instead of escape, who'd spent 3 months transforming an institution that had spent years trying to keep them invisible. The door opened without knocking. Maria, Rosa, Jennifer, and Carmen filed in, carrying coffee and the kind of exhaustion that came from doing years of work in months. "We did it," Maria said simply. "We survived it," Rosa corrected. "There's a difference." "We're still doing it," Jennifer added. "This isn't finished, it's just beginning." Carmen held up her phone, showing a news alert. The consulting firm settled. They're paying damages to all 15 companies, disbanding their diversity consulting division, and facing professional ethics reviews. "We didn't just win. We changed the game." They stood together in Naomi's office that still felt too big for one person, but just right for 5, watching the city through windows that had always been there, but only recently become accessible. Somewhere below them, the hotel hummed with work being done by people who were finally being seen, finally being valued, finally being asked what they knew instead of being told what they were. "So what happens now?" Rosa asked. "We proved we could fix one hotel. What's next?" Naomi thought about Isabel's standing offer, about Brussels and escape and fresh starts. She thought about the 17 other properties Marcus Winters owned, about the thousands of employees who might be buried under the same systems they'd just dismantled. She thought about the industry-wide patterns Rosa had documented, about all the companies where talent was being systematically wasted because discrimination had been repackaged as professional development. "Now we do it again," she said. "We take what we learned here and we export it to every property, every company, every system that's still grinding up talented people because it's more comfortable than change. We make this the standard instead of the exception." "That's ambitious," Jennifer said, but she was smiling. "That's terrifying," Maria added. "That's necessary," Carmen finished. They were right. It was all of those things. Ambitious and terrifying and absolutely necessary, because transformation didn't happen once. It happened in the daily choice to keep fighting, to keep believing that systems could change, to keep refusing to be invisible, even when visibility came with cost and exhaustion and the constant pressure of proving you deserved space you'd always belonged in. 6 months later, Naomi stood in the sole branch of the Regency Grandeur International, training their staff on the cultural integration and language services protocols she'd developed in Philadelphia. The woman leading housekeeping spoke 5 languages and had been working there for 4 years without anyone asking if she had skills beyond cleaning. By the end of the week, she'd be interviewing for a position in guest services. A year later, the consulting firm that had sold discrimination as expertise declared bankruptcy after losing multiple lawsuits and facing industry-wide rejection. Rosa's financial analysis had become the template for identifying coded bias in corporate systems, used by employment lawyers across the country to challenge discriminatory practices that had been hiding in plain sight. 18 months later, Carmen's restaurant received a Michelin star. The review specifically mentioned how the diverse culinary perspectives elevated traditional approaches, how leadership that recognized talent, regardless of origin, created food that transcended categorization. 2 years later, Maria published a book on workplace dignity and training protocols that became required reading in hospitality management programs. She dedicated it to Sofia Gonzalez with a note that read, "You survived by enforcing the system. We thrived by dismantling it. Both are responses to oppression. Only one creates freedom." And Naomi? She became Dr. Naomi Carter, not through the PhD program that had rejected her, but through an honorary doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania recognizing her work in linguistic equity and organizational transformation. She accepted it in a ceremony attended by all 4 women who'd fought beside her, surrounded by people who'd gone from invisible to invaluable because someone had finally bothered to ask what they knew. The phone call that had started everything, the one she wasn't supposed to answer, became a case study in business schools about how systematic discrimination wastes organizational resources. The woman in the housekeeping uniform who'd spoken perfect Dutch became a symbol of buried expertise, of talent that existed despite systems designed to hide it. But Naomi never forgot that she'd been lucky. Lucky that the phone rang when Marcus Winters was walking past. Lucky that Isabelle Duchamp valued competence over credentials. Lucky that 4 other women were willing to fight beside her instead of accepting escape as the only option. She never forgot the 189 denied transfer requests, the consulting firm that profited from oppression, the Sofia Gonzalezes who survived by becoming enforcers of their own limitations. She never forgot that systematic change required constant vigilance, that progress could be reversed, that the work of transformation was never truly finished. But she also never forgot standing in a cafe with 4 women whose stories echoed her own, deciding that staying to fight was worth more than escaping alone. She never forgot Rita learning to teach dignity, or Teresa finally being asked what she knew, or the countless invisible people who became visible because someone finally looked. 5 years after answering a phone she wasn't supposed to touch, Naomi Carter stood in front of a congressional committee discussing employment discrimination in the service industry. She testified about systematic barriers, about consulting firms that sold bias as expertise, about the cost of burying talent under assumptions about who deserved opportunities and who deserved to stay invisible. And she did it in 13 languages, translated simultaneously for international observers, demonstrating with every word that expertise had always been there, waiting, patient, refusing to be diminished even when systems tried to make it disappear. The invisible woman had rewritten the rules, not just for herself, but for everyone who came after. And that phone call that should never have happened? It became the moment when one person's courage to be seen transformed into collective power to transform institutions that had spent decades perfecting the art of not looking. The hotel still stood on the Philadelphia skyline, 37 floors of glass and steel, and the daily work of people who were finally being valued for what they could do, rather than limited by who the system assumed they were. And somewhere in the basement, in the service areas where invisible work happened, employees still cleaned rooms and pressed linens and maintained the machinery of luxury. But now, when they had languages to share, or expertise to offer, or dreams bigger than their current positions, someone asked, someone listened, someone saw them. And that made all the difference.